Wait a minute, I already told you. I didn't cheat on my husband. I insisted, my voice trembling with a mix of frustration and disbelief. But my mother-in-law and husband were relentless, their accusations flying as if they were undeniable truths. No, it's not like that at all, I quickly denied, trying to make them understand. But my mother-in-law wasn't having any of it. My son is sterile, she declared, her voice cold and unwavering. So there's no way you could be pregnant. If we got a medical certificate, it would prove your affair, though we don't even need one. It's perfectly obvious. Before I could respond, my mother's hand suddenly struck my face with a stinging slap, silencing me. I turned to my parents, hoping for support, but they just stared back at me, their expressions distant and disapproving. My name is Anna. I'm a 34-year-old office worker, and last year, after several years of dating, I married William. We both have careers, so we share the household chores, maintaining a balanced and stress-free life. William is amazing. He can cook, clean, and do laundry, and I'm truly grateful for that. Our newlywed life has been blissful, and I was certain it would continue this way. From the moment we got married, I've wanted to have children. In my 20s, I was all about my career, but seeing my friends happily raising their kids made me long for one of my own. But now, as I approach my mid-30s, conceiving has proven difficult. Though our marriage has been full of happiness, there have been moments of deep discouragement. Still, I held on to hope that we'd one day be blessed with a baby. Then, one morning, I woke up feeling nauseous. Could it be? I grabbed a test kit, my heart racing, and when the results showed positive, I was in shock. Could I really be pregnant? Shaken but hopeful, I called in late to work and rushed to the hospital. Yes, you're definitely pregnant, the doctor confirmed with a warm smile. I can hear the baby's heartbeat. Are you sure? I asked, barely able to believe it. Absolutely. You're in your 3rd month. Congratulations. You should get your maternity handbook too. I couldn't hold back my tears of joy. I was over the moon and couldn't wait to share the news with William. On my way home, I stopped by the supermarket, picking up food with a heart full of excitement. I imagined William's reaction, hoping he'd be just as overjoyed as I was. Maybe he'd even cry, and we'd embrace in happiness. Even after I got home, I couldn't stop smiling. I cooked dinner in the best mood, anticipating his arrival. Finally, when William walked through the door that night, he noticed the feast I'd prepared. Wow, dinner looks amazing today, he said, loosening his tie. I couldn't stop smiling as I looked at him, eager to share the news. Guess what? I'm pregnant, I announced, expecting an outburst of joy. Instead, his face froze in surprise. What? Pregnant? I nodded, waiting for the happiness to sink in, but his reaction took an unexpected turn. Whose baby is it? He asked, his voice sharp and cold. What? I stammered, taken aback. I asked you whose child it is, he repeated, his eyes narrowing with suspicion. What's wrong with you? Of course, it's yours, I said, my voice trembling with confusion. He sighed heavily, shaking his head. I'm sterile. What? I whispered, my heart sinking. So, it's not mine, he continued, a note of finality in his tone. I had no idea you were having an affair. I'm disappointed. Wait a minute, I'm not having an affair. This baby is yours, I insisted, desperation creeping into my voice. But he wouldn't listen. Just give me some time. I'm going back to my parents' house, he said, turning away. He left without even touching the meal I had prepared, and the door closed behind him with a sense of finality. A few days later, my husband called my parents, saying he wanted to talk with them. I begged him to discuss it with me alone first, but he ignored my pleas. So we agreed to meet at my parents' house the coming Saturday. The anxiety gnawed at me, and I couldn't sleep, my mind racing with dread over what was to come. I struggled to explain the situation to my parents, and when my in-laws arrived, my mother couldn't hold back any longer. What's going on? She asked, her voice laced with concern. My mother-in-law responded with icy detachment. What? You mean your daughter hasn't told you anything? I heard she's pregnant, but it's not my son's. My parents froze, shock etched on their faces. My father, still in disbelief, muttered, I never imagined Anna would cheat on him. I guess I was the only one who thought they had a strong marriage. Wait a minute, I interjected, my voice shaking. I told you before, I didn't have an affair. But my mother-in-law and husband had already made up their minds, assuming I was at fault without question. No, my mother-in-law continued, her tone accusatory. My son is sterile, so there's no way she could be pregnant. A medical certificate would prove the affair. But we don't even need that. It's obvious. As I tried to defend myself, my mother suddenly slapped me, the sting of her hand leaving me speechless. I turned to my parents, hoping for some semblance of support, but they both stared at me with cold, unfeeling eyes. My husband and mother-in-law exchanged smug looks, their expressions filled with disdain. Well, you deserve that slap, my mother-in-law sneered. You committed adultery and never even had the decency to apologize. To my horror, my mother bowed her head and quietly said, I'm sorry, as if accepting their version of the story without question. I apologize, I said, my voice trembling. Come on, you two. Apologize quickly, my mother urged, her tone sharp. My father followed suit, bowing his head to my mother-in-law and husband. I'm sorry for all the trouble my daughter has caused, he said, grabbing my head and forcing me to bow in submission. I brushed my father's hand away, desperate to make them listen. Please just hear me out for a minute, I pleaded, but they refused, their anger only growing. You've brought shame upon this family, my father shouted in front of my mother-in-law and husband. You're no daughter of mine. My mother-in-law and husband exchanged smug looks, their laughter ringing in my ears. Oh my, they disowned you, my mother-in-law sneered. Well, you got what you deserved. Just then, the living room door creaked open, and my sister walked in, her face a mask of concern. Dad, Mom, please calm down, she urged, her voice steady. Finally, a glimmer of hope, but my father turned his anger on her. How can you stay so calm after hearing all this? And this is none of your business. We're family, it's very much my business, my sister replied firmly. And before you arrived, I spoke with Anna. Is it true, William? Are you sterile? My mother-in-law and husband exchanged uneasy glances, clearly caught off guard. Could it be that your sister suspects us, William? My mother-in-law asked, her voice tinged with uncertainty. No, of course not, William replied, but maybe it's time we address this with some facts. My sister remained calm, ready to uncover the truth. When did you have the examination? My sister asked, her voice laced with suspicion. My husband and mother-in-law exchanged uneasy glances. He hasn't had any tests, my mother-in-law admitted. What? I froze, disbelief washing over me. My sister looked equally stunned. Then how can you be so sure he's sterile? My mother-in-law bristled. Are you trying to intimidate us? He hasn't been tested, but it's true, she insisted. How can you be so certain? My sister pressed, her tone unwavering. With an exasperated sigh, my mother-in-law began to explain. My son was married once before when he was young. They were together for 7 years, and she never got pregnant. But right after their divorce, his ex-wife conceived. Clearly, my son was the reason they couldn't have children. Now do you believe me? She demanded, her voice dripping with certainty. This proves that he's sterile, and that you must be cheating on him. She looked at me with utter contempt. The idea that you'd cheat on my son and still want to stay married to him is repulsive. You're a disgusting woman, you know that. My husband nodded in agreement, his expression mirroring his mother's disdain. Yes, you are. You've even dared to bear a child that I couldn't have. You've insulted me beyond words. I was utterly mortified. That wasn't proof that my husband was sterile, but I didn't have the knowledge to argue back. Desperate, I glanced at my sister, silently pleading for her help. She noticed my distress, gave me a reassuring nod, and began speaking again. I understand why you might think there's an issue given your past experience, she said calmly. But you can't definitively say your son is sterile based on that alone. There are couples who have children after 10 years of marriage without any fertility treatments. My mother-in-law scoffed, cutting her off. Don't try to lecture me with something you found on the internet. You're not a doctor, so what you say doesn't mean a thing. I wondered if my mother-in-law had paid attention at all when she met my family. My sister is a doctor and an obstetrician, my sister replied, her voice firm. Both my mother-in-law and husband were taken aback. What? They exclaimed in unison. I was stunned, too. It was clear they hadn't really listened when my sister had introduced herself before the wedding. Still incredulous, my sister continued, I explained this to you when we met before their marriage. You're speculating about this whole situation. It seems you're blaming my sister based on nothing but assumptions. She paused, then added, If you really want to accuse her, then let's do a proper examination. Since we're family, I'll do it for a reasonable price. When my sister made her suggestion, both my husband and mother-in-law flinched. But it seemed there was no turning back now. If you insist, let's get it checked out. My husband finally agreed, and my mother-in-law reluctantly nodded in agreement. The tests were conducted, and I decided to stay at my sister's house until the results came in. I couldn't bear to see my husband or return to my parents' home. My sister did her best to cheer me up during those days, helping to keep my mind from spiraling into worry. A few weeks later, the results were ready. We gathered at my parents' house to review them together. The tests confirmed that there was nothing wrong with my husband. My mother-in-law's face turned pale, and my husband looked genuinely surprised. "Anna, I'm sorry," he said, "but I'm glad to know that there's nothing wrong with me and that I can prove the child is mine." He said it so matter-of-factly that I was left speechless. Was this the same person who had accused me so easily, who had sided with his mother based on nothing but assumptions? My mother-in-law, instead of apologizing, laughed awkwardly and said, if this was how it was going to turn out, we should have done the test earlier. She offered no apology, and it was clear she had no intention of doing so. "I guess that settles it," my husband said, sounding oddly proud of himself. I realized I couldn't stay with a man like this any longer. My husband, assuming everything was settled, said, "Let's go home together," but I couldn't bring myself to leave with him. Sensing my hesitation, my sister intervened. "I don't think she's ready to go home yet. She'll stay with me for a while," she said. He reluctantly agreed, and finally my husband and mother-in-law left my parents' house. "What a pair," my mother muttered after they left. "They nearly fooled us too. I'm sorry for slapping you the other day, but this is all their fault." While my parents now blamed my husband and mother-in-law, I couldn't help but feel they were partially at fault too. My sister took me back to her apartment, and the moment we arrived, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. I broke down in tears. My sister didn't say a word, she just held me, comforting me in silence. I was terrified by how everyone had doubted me, looking at me with cold suspicion. In the midst of all that, my sister was the only one who stood by my side. I was so grateful that I had confided in her the day before the meeting at our parents' house. She went out of her way to come and support me, and I couldn't thank her enough. I stayed with my sister for a few days to recover, both physically and mentally. During that time, I made a decision. Together with my sister, I went to the house where my husband was staying. When he opened the door and saw me, he said, "Welcome home. I've been waiting for you." But his smile faded when he noticed my sister and another person standing beside me. Who's this?" he asked, confused. "This is my lawyer," I replied calmly. "Lawyer?" My husband's face went pale. "Why did you bring a lawyer?" "I can't live with you anymore. I'm here to ask for a divorce." He looked shocked, panic washing over his face. "Wait, what? This is so sudden. You can't just ask for a divorce out of nowhere." "It's not sudden," I said firmly. "After everything that's happened, this is the only option." The lawyer stepped in, explaining the fact that you and your mother accused Anna without any basis as grounds for divorce, and the fact that you concealed your supposed infertility from her, knowing she wanted children, is a significant issue. I don't think my husband expected this outcome at all. He nodded, but he seemed to be in shock. With him standing aside, I packed up my belongings and returned to my sister's house. After that, all communication with my husband was handled through my lawyer. I demanded compensation for the emotional pain and suffering he had caused me, as well as a fair division of property and child support. Thanks to my skilled lawyer, I was able to secure all of these. On top of that, my mother-in-law and husband had spread rumors in our neighborhood and at his workplace, claiming I was having an affair. I sued them for defamation of character. Not only did I receive additional compensation, but they were also forced to retract their statements and apologize to everyone they had misled. As a result, both my husband and mother-in-law lost all credibility and have since become socially isolated. I decided to rent an apartment just down the street from my sister's house. My parents offered for me to move back home so they could help raise their grandchild, but I politely declined. I didn't want them, who failed to protect me, to take care of my child. In fact, my sister had also experienced similar disappointment with our parents, who were more concerned about their social image than their children's well-being. She too has chosen to keep her distance from them. While I am grateful to my parents for supporting my education, I can't overlook how they failed me in this situation. I'll maintain a minimal relationship with them out of respect, but I'm deeply disappointed. For now, it's enough for me to have a sister who truly cares about me and stands by my side. I will always do my best to support her as well. My priority now is to be strong for the sake of my unborn child. The betrayal from my husband and mother-in-law was terrible, but the way my own parents turned against me without even listening was just as painful. I'm so grateful to have a wonderful sister who stood by me through it all. Being a single mother won't be easy, but with her support, I know I'll be fine. I'll cherish the bond we share and focus on living a happy life, one day at a time.
I stepped into our dimly lit living room, my heels clicking against the hardwood floor. The silence was deafening. "Paul?" I called out, my voice echoing through the empty house. No response. I glanced at my watch. 9:30 p.m. Where was he? I sighed, dropping my bag on the couch and heading to the kitchen. Another late night at the clinic, another missed dinner. As I opened the fridge, my eyes landed on a sticky note. "Working late, don't wait up, P." My shoulders slumped. I grabbed a yogurt and leaned against the counter, my mind racing. This wasn't like Paul. He'd always been my rock, my constant support through the long hours and stress of building my counseling center. But lately, the doorbell jolted me from my thoughts. I frowned, padding to the front door. Who could it be at this hour? I opened the door to find my best friend, Sarah, standing there with a bottle of wine and a sympathetic smile. "Happy anniversary, Laura," she said softly. My heart sank. Our anniversary. How could I have forgotten? "Oh, Sarah," I mumbled, stepping aside to let her in. I completely lost track of the date. She followed me to the kitchen, her brow furrowed. "Don't tell me Paul forgot too?" I gestured to the empty house. "He's working late, apparently." Sarah's eyes widened. "Paul? Mr. Romance himself? That doesn't sound like him at all." I nodded, grabbing 2 wine glasses from the cabinet. "I know. He's been different lately, distracted. I can't quite put my finger on it." As Sarah poured the wine, I found myself spilling everything. The long hours at work, Paul's sudden disinterest in our usual routines, the growing distance between us. "Have you talked to him about it?" Sarah asked, sipping her wine. I shook my head. "I've tried, but he just brushes it off. Says everything's fine." Sarah reached across the counter, squeezing my hand. "Laura, honey, you're a psychologist. You know better than anyone that communication is key." I nodded, feeling a lump form in my throat. "I know, it's just... I never thought I'd be in this position. Paul and I have always been so solid." Just then, we heard the front door open. Paul's voice called out, "Laura, you home?" Sarah and I exchanged glances. She quickly gathered her things, giving me a quick hug. "Call me tomorrow," she whispered before slipping out the back door. I took a deep breath, steeling myself as Paul entered the kitchen. He looked tired, his tie loosened and hair disheveled. "Hey," he said, barely meeting my eyes as he headed for the fridge. "Hey, yourself?" I replied, watching him closely. "Long day at work?" He nodded, grabbing a beer. "Yeah, you know how it is." I cleared my throat. "Do you know what day it is, Paul?" He paused, beer halfway to his lips. I saw the moment realization dawned in his eyes. "Oh God, Laura, I'm so sorry. I completely forgot." I felt tears pricking at the corners of my eyes. "You've never forgotten before." Paul set down his beer, moving towards me. I know. Things have just been so hectic lately. I'll make it up to you, I promise." As he wrapped his arms around me, I wanted to melt into his embrace like I always had, but something held me back. A nagging feeling that there was more to this than simple forgetfulness. I pulled away, looking into his eyes. "Paul, what's going on? And don't tell me it's nothing. I know you better than that." He hesitated, and in that moment I saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Guilt? Fear? Before I could decipher it, his phone buzzed. He glanced at it, then back at me. "I'm sorry, I have to take this," he said, already stepping away. "We'll talk later, okay?" As he hurried out of the kitchen, phone pressed to his ear, I felt a chill run down my spine. Something was very wrong, and I was determined to find out what it was. The next morning, I woke to an empty bed. Paul had left early, again. I sighed, rubbing my temples as I made my way to the kitchen. The house was a mess. Dishes piled in the sink, laundry overflowing. This wasn't like us. This wasn't like Paul. As I started the coffee maker, my phone buzzed. A text from Sarah. "How'd it go last night?" I typed back, "Not great. Paul came home late, forgot our anniversary. Something's off." Her response was immediate. "Want me to come over after work?" "Please," I replied, grateful for her support. The day at the clinic dragged on. Between sessions, I found myself distracted, my mind wandering to Paul's strange behavior. By the time Sarah arrived that evening, I was a bundle of nerves. "All right, spill," she said, settling onto the couch. "What's really going on?" I took a deep breath. "It's not just the anniversary, Sarah. Paul's been different, distant. He's never home, always working late. And when he is here, he's glued to his phone." Sarah's eyes narrowed. "You don't think he's cheating?" I finished. "I don't know. I never thought he would, but—" "Have you looked for any evidence?" she asked gently. I shook my head. "I haven't wanted to, but maybe I should." With Sarah's encouragement, I began searching the house. We combed through drawers, checked his laptop, even looked under the mattress. Nothing seemed out of place until I opened his closet. "Laura," Sarah called, holding up a stack of glossy catalogs. "Look at these." I flipped through them, my confusion growing. Rolex watches, designer suits, luxury cars. None of these were things Paul had ever shown interest in before. "This doesn't make sense," I muttered. "Paul's always been so practical. Why would he suddenly be interested in all this stuff?" Sarah shrugged. "Maybe he's going through a midlife crisis?" Before I could respond, we heard the front door open. Paul's voice called out, "Laura, you home?" Sarah quickly helped me shove everything back in the closet. "I'll slip out the back," she whispered. "Call me later." I met Paul in the living room, my heart racing. He looked tired, his shirt wrinkled and hair unkempt. "Hey," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "How was work?" He shrugged, not meeting my eyes. "Fine. Busy. Listen, I've got to make a call. Can you handle dinner tonight?" I felt a surge of frustration. "Paul, I've been handling dinner every night for weeks now, and the laundry, and the cleaning. What's going on with you?" He finally looked at me, his expression a mix of guilt and irritation. "I'm sorry, okay? Work's just been crazy lately. I'll try to do better." As he turned to leave, a catalog fell from his briefcase. I snatched it up before he could react. "Luxury watches, Paul? Since when are you interested in this stuff?" He grabbed the catalog from my hands, his face flushing. "It's nothing. Just window shopping." "Window shopping?" I echoed incredulously. "Paul, you hate shopping. You've worn the same watch for 10 years. What's really going on?" For a moment I thought he might confess, but then his phone buzzed and that familiar, distant look returned to his eyes. "I've got to take this," he muttered, already walking away. "We'll talk later, okay?" As he disappeared into his study, I stood there feeling lost in my own home. The man I thought I knew better than anyone was becoming a stranger before my eyes. I picked up my phone, my fingers hovering over Sarah's number, but instead I found myself opening our joint bank account app. If Paul wasn't going to give me answers, maybe our financial records would. As the app loaded, my heart pounded. Whatever I was about to discover, I had a feeling our lives would never be the same. I stared at the bank statement, my hands shaking. The numbers didn't lie. Thousands of dollars. Gone. Transactions at high-end stores, restaurants I'd never heard of, even a jewelry shop. My stomach churned as I scrolled through page after page of extravagant spending. "Laura?" Paul's voice startled me. I quickly locked my phone, shoving it under a cushion. He stood in the doorway, looking wary. "Everything okay?" I forced a smile. "Fine. Just tired." He nodded, not quite meeting my eyes. "I'm heading out. Don't wait up." As the front door closed behind him, I felt something inside me snap. Enough was enough. I grabbed my phone and dialed Sarah. "I need you to come over. Now." An hour later, Sarah and I sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by bank statements and receipts. "I can't believe this," Sarah muttered, shaking her head. "Laura, he spent almost all your savings." I nodded, numb. "I know. And look at this." I pointed to a recurring charge. "He's been renting a storage unit. Why would he need that?" Sarah's eyes widened. "You don't think—" "I don't know what to think anymore," I said, my voice cracking. "The Paul I knew would never do this." Sarah reached across the table, squeezing my hand. "You need to confront him, Laura. Tonight." I nodded, steeling myself. "You're right. No more excuses." When Paul finally came home well past midnight, I was waiting. The statements were spread out on the coffee table, a silent accusation. "What's all this?" he asked, his voice tight. I met his gaze, unflinching. "You tell me, Paul, where's our money going?" He paled, then anger flashed across his face. "You went through our bank statements?" That's an invasion of privacy. I laughed bitterly. Privacy? We're married, Paul? Or have you forgotten that too? He ran a hand through his hair, pacing. It's not what you think. I can explain. Then explain, I said, my voice cold. Explain the watches, the suits, the storage unit. Explain why you're throwing away everything we've worked for. Paul's shoulders slumped. For a moment, I saw a flicker of the man I married. I got in over my head. There's this group at work. They're all into luxury goods, so exclusive clubs. I just wanted to fit in. I shook my head, disbelieving. Fit in? Paul, you've spent our entire savings. How could you be so selfish? His face hardened. Selfish? I've supported you for years while you built your practice. Maybe I wanted something for myself for once. His words hit me like a slap. Supported me? I've been working 60-hour weeks to keep us afloat while you've been out playing dress-up. Paul grabbed his keys. I can't deal with this right now. I'm leaving. As he stormed out, I called after him. If you walk out that door, don't bother coming back. The slam of the door was his only response. I sank onto the couch, my anger giving way to exhaustion. Sarah, who had been quietly watching from the kitchen, came and sat beside me. What are you going to do? She asked softly. I took a deep breath, feeling a strange sense of calm wash over me. I'm going to that storage unit. I need to see what he's been hiding. Sarah nodded, a fierce look in her eyes. I'll drive. As we headed out into the night, I felt a mix of dread and determination. Whatever I found in that storage unit, I knew it would change everything. But I was done being in the dark. It was time to face the truth, no matter how painful. Ready? Sarah asked as we pulled up to the storage facility. I nodded, my jaw set. Ready. As I stepped out of the car, I felt like I was walking into battle. But this time, I was fighting for myself. The storage unit door creaked open, revealing a treasure trove of luxury items. Designer suits hung neatly in garment bags, rows of gleaming watches lined velvet-covered shelves, and stacks of shoeboxes filled one corner. The sight made my stomach churn. Oh, Laura, Sarah whispered, her eyes wide. This is worse than we thought. I nodded, unable to speak. My hands trembled as I reached for a nearby shoebox. Inside, nestled in tissue paper, was a pair of Italian leather shoes. The price tag still attached made me gasp. $3,000. He spent $3,000 on shoes, I muttered, disbelief coloring my voice. As we dug deeper, the extent of Paul's obsession became clear. Receipts scattered throughout the unit told a damning story. Tens of thousands of dollars spent on frivolous luxuries. I can't believe this, I said, sinking to the floor. All our savings, our future, gone. Sarah sat beside me, her arm around my shoulders. What are you going to do? Before I could answer, my phone buzzed. Paul's name flashed on the screen. I hesitated, then answered. Where are you? His voice was tight with anger. I came home and you were gone. I'm at your storage unit, I replied coldly. Care to explain all this? There was a long pause. Then I'm coming over. Don't touch anything. I hung up without responding. Sarah looked at me, concern etched on her face. Do you want me to stay? I shook my head. No, I need to face this alone. But could you wait nearby just in case? 20 minutes later, Paul's car screeched into the parking lot. He stormed up to the unit, his face a mask of fury. How dare you invade my privacy like this, he shouted. I stood my ground. Privacy? You mean your secret life of luxury while I worked myself to the bone? Paul's anger deflated slightly. He ran a hand through his hair, looking around at the evidence of his spending spree. You don't understand. This is an investment, I laughed bitterly. An investment in what, Paul? Your ego? In us, he shouted. I did this for us. To fit in with the right crowd, to make connections that could benefit both of us. I shook my head, disbelief washing over me. You really believe that, don't you? You've thrown away everything we've worked for, and you think it's justified? Paul's face hardened. I won't apologize for wanting more out of life. Maybe if you weren't so focused on your precious clinic, you'd understand. His words hit me like a physical blow. I stumbled back, hurt and anger warring within me. My clinic? The one that's been keeping us afloat while you played dress-up? I never asked you to work so hard, Paul shouted. I was fine with our life before, but you just had to prove something to the world, didn't you? I stared at him, suddenly seeing our entire relationship in a new light. You resent me, I said softly. You resent my success. Paul's silence was all the confirmation I needed. In that moment, something inside me hardened. I straightened my spine, meeting Paul's gaze with steely determination. I want you out of the house by tomorrow, I said, my voice steady. I'll be contacting a divorce lawyer in the morning. Paul's eyes widened. Laura, wait. We can work this out. I'll sell everything, I promise. I shook my head. It's too late, Paul. The trust is gone. As I turned to leave, Paul grabbed my arm. You can't do this. Half of this is mine. You have no right. I wrenched my arm free. Watch me. Stepping out into the cool night air, I felt a strange mix of pain and liberation. Sarah was waiting by her car, concern etched on her face. Are you okay? She asked. I took a deep breath, my mind racing with plans. No, I replied honestly, but I will be. As we drove away, leaving Paul and his mountain of luxury goods behind, I made a silent vow. I would reclaim my life, my finances, and my self-respect. And I would make damn sure Paul understood the consequences of his actions. The battle was just beginning, but for the first time in months I felt ready to fight. The next morning, I woke with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in months. My first call was to Janet, a ruthless divorce attorney I'd met at a networking event. She agreed to see me immediately. You've made the right choice, Laura, Janet said, her voice steely as she reviewed the financial documents I'd brought. We'll file for divorce on grounds of financial misconduct. I'll have a restraining order drawn up to keep Paul away from your assets. I nodded, a lump forming in my throat. What about the house, our joint accounts? Janet's eyes gleamed. Leave that to me. By the end of the day, Paul won't have access to a dime. As I left Janet's office, a text from Sarah pinged. Paul's been calling non-stop. What should I tell him? I typed back, nothing. I'm handling it. My next stop was the bank. With Janet's paperwork in hand, I closed our joint accounts and opened new ones in my name only. The teller's eyes widened as she processed the transactions, but I kept my face impassive. Back home, I started packing. Each of Paul's possessions I touched fueled my anger and resolve. His favorite sweater, the watch I'd given him for our first anniversary, the photos of us smiling on vacation, all of it went into boxes destined for his parents' house. As I worked, my phone buzzed incessantly. Paul's calls, his parents' worried messages, even a few concerned texts from mutual friends. I ignored them all. By late afternoon, the house was transformed. Paul's presence had been erased, leaving only my belongings and the bare essentials. I'd arranged for a moving company to come the next day. Tonight would be my last night in this house, our house. As twilight fell, I allowed myself a moment of grief. Collapsing onto the couch, I let the tears flow freely for the first time since discovering Paul's betrayal. I mourned for the life we'd built, the dreams we'd shared, the future I thought we'd have. But as quickly as it came, the grief passed, replaced by a steely determination. I was Laura Mendez, a successful psychologist who'd built her practice from the ground up. I didn't need Paul or his misguided attempts at status. Just as I'd composed myself, a frantic knocking echoed through the house. Paul's voice, tinged with panic, called out, Laura, open the door! What have you done? I approached the door cautiously, my heart racing. Through the peephole, I could see Paul, disheveled and wild-eyed. Laura, please, he begged. I can't access any of our accounts. The credit cards are maxed out. What's going on? I took a deep breath, steadying myself. It's over, Paul, I called through the door. I've filed for divorce. You'll be hearing from my lawyer. His fist pounded against the wood. You can't do this. Half of everything is mine. Not anymore, I replied, my voice stronger than I felt. You gambled it all away on your little luxury addiction. There's nothing left for you here. Paul's voice broke. Where am I supposed to go? What am I supposed to do? For a moment, I felt a flicker of sympathy. But then I remembered the months of lies, the drained bank accounts, the shattered trust. That's not my problem anymore, I said firmly. Goodbye, Paul. As his pleas faded, replaced by the sound of retreating footsteps, I leaned against the door, exhausted but resolute. My phone buzzed again, a text from Janet confirming that all the legal paperwork was in order. I looked around at the half-empty house, feeling a strange mix of loss and liberation. Tomorrow, I'd move into my new apartment, start my new life. But tonight, I'd allow myself one last evening in the home I'd loved, saying goodbye to the life I'd thought I'd have. As I settled onto the couch with a glass of wine, my phone lit up with a call from an unknown number. My finger hovered over the decline button, but something made me pause. Whatever this call was, whatever new challenge it might bring, I was ready to face it head on. Taking a deep breath, I answered the call, stepping into the next chapter of my life with courage and determination. I smoothed my blouse, taking a deep breath as I prepared for my first client of the day. It had been 2 weeks since I'd moved out, and I was slowly adjusting to my new life. The clinic had become my sanctuary, a place where I could focus on helping others and forget my own troubles. The receptionist's voice crackled over the intercom. "Dr. Mendez, your 9 o'clock is here." "Send them in," I replied, straightening the papers on my desk. The door opened and my heart stopped. Paul stood there, flanked by his parents, looking haggard and desperate. "What are you doing here?" I hissed, standing up. "This is my workplace." Paul's mother stepped forward, her eyes pleading. "Laura, please, we need to talk." I glanced at my watch, then at the waiting room beyond. "I have clients scheduled all day. This is completely inappropriate. Please," Paul's father interjected, "just give us 5 minutes." Against my better judgment, I nodded, gesturing for them to sit. Paul remained standing, his eyes fixed on me. "Laura," he began, his voice cracking. "I'm sorry. I know I messed up, but please, give me another chance." I felt a surge of anger. Another chance? Paul, you drained our savings, lied to me for months, and then had the audacity to blame me for your actions. What could you possibly say to make that right? Paul's mother leaned forward. "Laura, we had no idea what was happening. We're horrified by Paul's behavior. But surely there must be a way to work this out." I shook my head, my resolve strengthening. There's nothing to work out. Paul made his choices, and now he has to live with the consequences. Paul's father stood up, his face reddening. "Now see here, young lady. You can't just throw away a marriage like this. What about your vows?" "My vows?" I laughed bitterly. "What about Paul's vows? To love and cherish me, to be honest and faithful." Paul stepped forward, reaching for my hand. I jerked away. "Laura, please. I'll do anything. I'll sell everything, get counseling, whatever you want." For a moment, I wavered. The pain in his eyes was real, and part of me ached to comfort him. But then I remembered the months of lies, the betrayal, the way he'd gambled away our future. "It's too late, Paul," I said quietly. "The trust is gone. I can't build a life with someone I can't rely on." Paul's face crumpled. His mother burst into tears while his father's expression hardened. "You're making a mistake," he growled. "Paul's a good man. He just lost his way for a bit." I stood up, my patience wearing thin. "With all due respect, Mr. Mendez, you don't know the half of it. Your son didn't just lose his way. He systematically drained our accounts, maxed out our credit cards, and lied to me for months. He put his own selfish desires above our marriage and our future." Paul's parents turned to him, shock and disappointment etched on their faces. "Is this true?" his mother whispered. Paul nodded, unable to meet their eyes. I didn't mean for it to go so far. I just wanted to fit in, to feel important." His father's face darkened. He grabbed Paul's arm, pulling him towards the door. "We're leaving. Now." As they reached the doorway, Paul's father turned back to me. "I'm sorry, Laura, we had no idea." He nodded once, a gesture of understanding and respect, before leading his son away. I sank into my chair, emotionally drained. The confrontation had been brutal, but I felt a strange sense of closure. I'd stood my ground, spoken my truth, and come out stronger. My phone buzzed. A text from Sarah. "Lunch later? I have news about the clinic expansion." I smiled, feeling a glimmer of excitement for the future. As I typed my reply, I realized that for the first time in months, I was looking forward to what lay ahead. The road wouldn't be easy, but I was ready to face it head on. The intercom crackled again. "Dr. Mendez, your next client is ready." Taking a deep breath, I straightened my shoulders and stood up. It was time to get back to work, to continue building the life and career I'd fought so hard for. Whatever challenges lay ahead, I knew I had the strength to face them. The weeks following Paul's confrontation at my clinic flew by in a whirlwind of activity. I threw myself into my work, channeling all my pain and anger into helping my patients and expanding the counseling center. The distraction was welcome, but exhaustion was catching up with me. One evening, as I was locking up the clinic, Sarah appeared at my side. "Laura, we need to talk," I sighed, recognizing the concern in her eyes. "I'm fine, Sarah. Really." She shook her head. "No, you're not. You're working yourself to the bone. When was the last time you took a day off?" I couldn't remember. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. Sarah continued, "The clinic's thriving, but at what cost? You're burning out, Laura." Her words stung because I knew they were true. I'd been so focused on proving I could succeed without Paul that I'd neglected my own well-being. "You're right," I admitted. I don't know how to slow down. If I stop, I'll have to face everything that's happened." Sarah squeezed my hand. "That's exactly what you need to do. Face it, process it, and move on." The next day, I made a decision. I hired 2 new therapists to help with the workload and blocked out a week for myself. It was time to confront the emotional fallout I'd been avoiding. On my first day off, I woke up feeling lost. Without work to distract me, the weight of the past few months came crashing down. I found myself standing in front of the full-length mirror, really looking at myself for the first time in ages. The woman staring back at me looked tired, worn, but there was a strength in her eyes that I hadn't noticed before. I realized that, despite everything, I was still standing. I had survived. As the week progressed, I allowed myself to feel everything I'd been suppressing. The anger, the betrayal, the grief for the future I'd lost. But with each passing day, I also felt a growing sense of pride in how I'd handled the situation. On the 5th day of my break, I received an unexpected call from Paul's mother. "Laura," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "I wanted to thank you." I was stunned. "Thank me for what?" "For being strong enough to walk away," she replied. "Paul, he's getting help now, seeing a therapist, working through his issues. Your actions forced him to face his problems." I felt a mix of emotions, relief, sadness, a hint of vindication. "I'm glad he's getting help," I said softly. After hanging up, I sat on my balcony watching the sunset. For the first time since this ordeal began, I felt truly at peace. I had made the right decision, not just for myself, but for Paul too. The next morning, I woke up feeling refreshed and energized. I headed to the clinic, eager to implement some new ideas I'd had during my break. As I walked in, I was greeted by the sight of my team, my growing, thriving team, working together seamlessly. Sarah approached me, a wide smile on her face. "Welcome back, boss. How are you feeling?" I returned her smile, feeling a surge of gratitude for her friendship and support. "Better than I have in months. Thank you, Sarah, for everything." As I settled into my office, I noticed a stack of patient files on my desk. New referrals, a testament to our growing reputation. I picked up the first file, ready to dive in, when my phone buzzed with a text from Janet, my divorce attorney. "Final papers ready for signing. Paul's agreed to all terms. It's over." I stared at the message, a complex mix of emotions washing over me. It was over. Really, truly over. The realization hit me hard, bringing with it a sense of finality I hadn't expected. For a moment, I felt overwhelmed. But then I looked around my office, at the degrees on the wall, the photos of happy patients, the evidence of the life I'd built for myself. I took a deep breath, straightened my shoulders, and picked up my pen. It was time to close this chapter and start writing the next one. Whatever challenges lay ahead, I knew I had the strength to face them. After all, I was Dr. Laura Mendez, survivor, therapist, and architect of my own destiny. With a steady hand, I signed the papers, ready to embrace my new beginning. The day had finally arrived. I stood outside the courthouse, my heart pounding as I clutched the folder containing the final divorce papers. Sarah squeezed my hand reassuringly. "You've got this, Laura?" she whispered. I nodded, taking a deep breath before pushing open the heavy doors. The courtroom was nearly empty, save for Janet, my attorney, and Paul, sitting alone at the defendant's table. Our eyes met briefly, and I was struck by how different he looked. Humbled, almost defeated. As the judge entered, I straightened my spine, ready to face this final hurdle. The proceedings moved quickly, a blur of legal jargon and formalities. Then, suddenly, it was time for the final statements. "Dr. Mendez," the judge addressed me, "do you have anything you'd like to say before we conclude?" I stood, my voice steady as I spoke. "Your Honor, I came into this marriage with hope and trust. I'm leaving it with wisdom and strength. While I regret the circumstances that brought us here, I don't regret the decision to end this chapter of my life." I turned to Paul, meeting his gaze directly. "I hope you find peace and purpose, Paul. But I need to find those things for myself now." Paul nodded, a mix of emotions playing across his face. When it was his turn to speak, he surprised me. "I'm sorry, Laura," he said, his voice cracking, "for everything. You deserved better, and I hope you find happiness." With those words, it was done. The judge's gavel fell, declaring our marriage officially dissolved. As we left the courtroom, Paul's parents approached me. "Laura," his mother began, "we want you to know how sorry we are for everything that happened. We've restricted Paul's access to finances, and he's found a job. He's working hard to make amends." I nodded, feeling a weight lift from my shoulders. "Thank you. I'm glad he's getting his life back on track." As they walked away, I turned to Sarah and Janet, a smile breaking across my face. It's over. It's really over. We celebrated that night, a small gathering of friends at my new apartment. As I looked around at the faces of those who had supported me through this ordeal, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. The next morning, I woke early, energized despite the late night. I had a full day of sessions at the clinic, but for the first time in months, I felt truly excited about the work ahead. As I walked into the clinic, I was greeted by the sight of my expanded team, the new therapists I'd hired, the receptionist who'd stood by me through it all, and Sarah, my rock. "Good morning, Dr. Mendez," they chorused, and I felt a surge of pride. This was what I had built, what I had fought for. My first patient of the day was a woman going through a difficult divorce. As she poured out her fears and doubts, I found myself drawing on my own experiences, offering not just professional advice, but genuine empathy and understanding. "You're stronger than you know," I told her, the words resonating deeply within me. "This is just one chapter of your story. The next one is yours to write." As she left, looking more hopeful than when she'd arrived, I realized something profound. My own painful journey had made me a better therapist, a more compassionate person. I had turned my pain into purpose. That evening, as I locked up the clinic, I paused to look at the plaque on the door. Dr. Laura Mendez, clinical psychologist. It was the same name I'd always had, but I felt like a different woman now. Stronger, wiser, more self-assured. I walked home, enjoying the warm evening air and the sense of possibility that seemed to stretch out before me. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "Dinner tomorrow? New restaurant in town." I smiled, typing back a quick, "Absolutely." Before I could put my phone away, another message came through, this one from Paul's mother. "Laura, I hope this isn't overstepping, but I wanted you to know that Paul's doing well in therapy. He often speaks of how your strength inspired him to get help. Thank you for being the catalyst for positive change in his life, even if it meant ending your marriage. I hope you're finding happiness in your new chapter." I read the message twice, a complex mix of emotions washing over me. There was a twinge of sadness for what might have been, but it was overshadowed by a sense of peace and closure. As I reached my apartment, I paused on the threshold, looking back at the city skyline. The sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink. It struck me as a fitting metaphor. One chapter of my life was ending, but a new, potentially more beautiful one was just beginning. I stepped inside, closing the door behind me. Tomorrow was a new day, full of possibilities, and I was ready to embrace it with open arms. The Laura who had started this journey was gone, replaced by a woman who knew her worth, her strength, and her potential. As I settled in for the evening, I felt a sense of excitement for what the future held. Whatever challenges lay ahead, I knew I had the strength to face them. After all, I was Dr. Laura Mendez, survivor, healer, and author of my own destiny. I smoothed my blouse and took a deep breath before stepping into the conference room. The promotion I'd been working towards for years was finally within reach, but the butterflies in my stomach reminded me of everything I stood to lose. "Francesca, come in," my boss Richard called out. "We've been waiting for you." I plastered on a smile and strode to the empty chair at the head of the table. "Sorry I'm late. Traffic was a nightmare." Richard waved off my apology. "No worries. We're just excited to share the news." He beamed at me, and I felt a surge of hope. "Congratulations, Fran. You're our new regional sales director." The room erupted in applause, but I could barely hear it over the pounding of my heart. I'd done it. After years of long hours and missed family dinners, I'd finally reached the top. "Thank you," I managed, my voice thick with emotion. "I'm honored and thrilled to take on this new role." As my colleagues offered their congratulations, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I ignored it, focusing on shaking hands and accepting praise. It wasn't until an hour later, when I finally escaped to my office, that I checked the missed calls. 5 from Neil, 3 from the kids' school. My stomach dropped as I dialed Neil's number. He picked up on the first ring. "Where have you been?" he demanded, his voice tight with anger. "I've been trying to reach you for hours." "I was in a meeting," I said, guilt washing over me. "What's wrong? Are the kids okay?" Neil sighed heavily. "Tommy's sick. The school called, but they couldn't reach you, so I had to leave work early to pick him up." I closed my eyes, fighting back tears. "I'm so sorry, Neil. I should have checked my phone." "Yeah, you should have," he snapped. "This isn't the first time, Fran. I can't keep dropping everything because you're too busy with work." His words stung, but I knew he was right. "I'll make it up to you," I promised. "I'm leaving now. I'll be home in 20 minutes. "Don't bother," Neil said coldly. "I've got it under control. Just come home when you're done with whatever's more important than your family." The line went dead, leaving me staring at my phone in shock. Neil had never spoken to me like that before. We'd had our disagreements, sure, but this felt different, dangerous. I grabbed my purse and rushed out of the office, my promotion celebration forgotten. As I navigated through rush-hour traffic, my mind raced. How had things gotten so bad without me noticing? When was the last time Neil and I had a real conversation that didn't revolve around schedules or the kids? By the time I pulled into our driveway, my hands were shaking. I took a moment to compose myself before heading inside. The house was quiet when I entered, save for the low murmur of the TV in the living room. I found Neil sprawled on the couch, a beer in hand. "Where are the kids?" I asked, setting down my purse. "Asleep," Neil replied, not looking at me. "Tommy's fever broke an hour ago." I perched on the edge of the armchair, studying my husband's profile. "Neil, I'm sorry. I should have been there." He turned to face me then, his eyes hard. "You're always sorry, Fran, but nothing ever changes." "That's not fair," I protested. "I work hard to provide for this family." Neil laughed bitterly. "And what good is that if you're never here? The kids barely know you anymore." His words hit me like a physical blow. "That's not true," I whispered, but even as I said it, I wondered if he was right. Neil stood up abruptly. "I'm going to bed. We can talk about this in the morning." As he walked away, leaving me alone in the darkened living room, I realized that my perfect day had turned into a nightmare, and something told me this was just the beginning. The next morning, I woke to an empty bed and the sound of Neil rummaging in the kitchen. I steeled myself for the conversation ahead and made my way downstairs. "Morning," I said, trying to keep my voice light. Neil grunted in response, not looking up from his coffee. "Neil, we need to talk about last night." He sighed, finally meeting my eyes. "What's there to talk about, Fran? You made your choice?" "My choice?" I felt my temper rising. "I didn't choose between my job and my family. I'm trying to do both." Neil slammed his mug down, coffee sloshing onto the counter. "Well, you're failing at one of them. Do you even know what's going on in your kids' lives anymore?" His words stung, but I refused to back down. "Of course I do. Just because I'm not here every minute doesn't mean I'm not involved." "Oh, really?" Neil's voice dripped with sarcasm. "What's Tommy's favorite subject in school right now? When was Lily's last dance recital?" I opened my mouth to respond, then closed it again. The truth was, I didn't know. Neil nodded, a bitter smile on his face. "That's what I thought." "That's not fair," I protested. "I'm working hard to give them a better life." "They don't need a better life, Fran. They need their mother." We glared at each other across the kitchen island, years of resentment bubbling to the surface. "I can't do this anymore," Neil said finally, his voice quieter but no less angry. "I'm tired of being a single parent in a 2-parent household." My heart clenched. "What are you saying?" Before he could answer, my phone rang. I glanced at the screen. It was Richard. "Don't you dare answer that," Neil warned. I hesitated, torn between my responsibilities at work and the crisis unfolding in my kitchen. "If you take that call, Fran, we're done." "I mean it." With shaking hands, I declined the call. "There! Are you happy now?" Neil laughed humorlessly. "No, Fran, I'm not happy. I haven't been happy for a long time." The front door opened, and our children's voices filled the house. Neil and I quickly composed ourselves as Tommy and Lily burst into the kitchen. "Mom, you're home!" Lily exclaimed, throwing her arms around me. I hugged her tightly, fighting back tears. "I am, sweetie. I missed you." As I helped the kids with breakfast, I couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted in my marriage. Neil barely spoke, his eyes distant as he mechanically went through the motions of the morning routine. Later that day, I was in my home office when I overheard Neil on the phone in the hallway. "I don't know, Sarah. Things are really tense right now," he was saying, his voice low. "No, I haven't told her about, it's not the right time." My blood ran cold. Who was Sarah, and what hadn't Neil told me? I waited until he hung up before confronting him. "Who's Sarah?" Neil's face paled. She's just a coworker. We've been working on a project together." "And what haven't you told me?" I pressed, my heart pounding. Neil ran a hand through his hair, looking everywhere but at me. "It's nothing, Fran, just work stuff." But I could see the guilt in his eyes, the way he fidgeted with his wedding ring. In that moment, I knew our marriage was in far more trouble than I'd realized. "Neil," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, "are you having an affair?" The silence that followed was deafening. Neil opened his mouth, closed it, then opened it again. But before he could answer, my phone rang once more. This time, it was the kids' school. As I answered the call, my eyes locked with Neil's. The look on his face told me everything I needed to know, and I felt my world crumbling around me. The hotel room felt cold and impersonal as I stared at my laptop, trying to focus on the presentation I'd be giving tomorrow. But my mind kept drifting back home, to Neil and the kids. It had been 3 days since I'd left for this business trip, and the tension from our last argument still lingered in the air. My phone buzzed, and I felt a mixture of relief and anxiety when I saw it was Tommy calling. "Hey, sweetie," I answered, forcing cheerfulness into my voice. "How are you?" "Hi, Mom," Tommy said, his voice small and uncertain. "When are you coming home?" My heart clenched. "In 2 days, honey. Is everything okay?" There was a pause, and I could hear Lily's voice in the background. "Yeah, I guess," Tommy finally replied. "It's just, Dad's been acting weird." I sat up straighter, my mom instincts on high alert. "Weird how?" "He's not home much," Lily chimed in, having apparently grabbed the phone from her brother. "And when he is, he's always on his phone or leaving to run errands." A cold feeling settled in my stomach. "Have you two been alone a lot?" "Mrs. Johnson from next door has been checking on us," Tommy said. "But yeah, kinda." I closed my eyes, fighting back a wave of anger and fear. "Okay, listen to me," I said, keeping my voice calm. "I want you both to go to Mrs. Johnson's house right now. Tell her I called and asked her to keep you there until I can reach your father. Can you do that for me?" After getting their agreement and making sure they were safely with our neighbor, I dialed Neil's number. It went straight to voicemail. "Neil," I said, my voice shaking with barely contained fury, "call me back immediately. We need to talk about why our children are home alone while you're out God knows where." I paced the hotel room, my mind racing. Was Neil with Sarah? Had he abandoned our family for her? The thought made me sick. An hour passed with no word from Neil. I called Mrs. Johnson, who confirmed the kids were safe with her. Then I did something I never thought I'd do. I called Neil's office. "Hello, this is Francesca, Neil's wife," I said when his assistant answered. "I'm trying to reach him about an urgent family matter. Is he there?" "I'm sorry, Mrs. Carter, but Neil called in sick today," the assistant replied, sounding confused. "He said he had a bad case of the flu." The lie hit me like a physical blow. "I see," I managed to say. "Thank you." I hung up and sank onto the bed, my whole body trembling. Neil wasn't sick. He wasn't working late. He was... What? Running around with Sarah while our children sat at home alone? My phone buzzed again. A text from Neil. "Sorry. Was in a meeting. Kids are fine. Don't worry." The casual dismissal of my concerns pushed me over the edge. I dialed his number again, and this time he picked up. "Neil, where the hell are you?" I demanded without preamble. "Fran, calm down," he said, his voice maddeningly calm. "I told you, everything's fine." "Everything is not fine," I shouted. "Our children are alone. You lied to your work about being sick, and you're off doing God knows what with God knows who." There was a long pause. When Neil spoke again, his voice was cold. "You're one to talk about abandoning our family, Fran. How many nights have you been away this month?" "That's different, and you know it," I hissed. "I'm working, Neil. What's your excuse?" Another pause. Then, "Maybe I needed a break too, Fran. Maybe I'm tired of being the one who's always there while you get to escape." His words hit me like a slap. Is that what this is? Punishment? Or is it just an excuse to be with Sarah? I heard Neil's sharp intake of breath. How do you know about Sarah? So it's true, I whispered, feeling like the floor had dropped out from under me. You're having an affair. Fran, it's not. It's complicated, Neil stammered. But I'd heard enough. I'm coming home, I said, my voice eerily calm. And when I get there, Neil, you'd better be prepared to explain yourself to me and our children. Because this ends now. I hung up and immediately started packing my bags. As I booked the first flight home, I felt a strange mix of rage, heartbreak, and determination. Whatever happened next, one thing was clear. Nothing would ever be the same again. The conference room erupted in applause as I concluded my presentation. Smiles and nods of approval surrounded me, but the victory felt hollow. My mind was back home with Tommy and Lily, wondering if Neil had kept his word about being there for them. Exceptional work, Francesca, my boss Richard beamed. You've exceeded all expectations in your new role. I forced a smile. Thank you, Richard. I'm glad it's been well received. As my colleagues filed out, Richard held me back. Fran, I know this promotion has been challenging, but you're thriving. We're considering you for an even more senior position. My heart raced, but not from excitement. That's wonderful, Richard. Can I have some time to think about it? He looked surprised but nodded. Of course. Take the weekend. We'll discuss it on Monday. Back in my hotel room, I stared at my phone, my finger hovering over Neil's number. We hadn't spoken since our heated exchange 3 days ago. Taking a deep breath, I dialed. Fran, Neil's voice was guarded. Is everything okay? I don't know, I admitted. How are the kids? They're fine. We had pizza night yesterday. Lily got an A on her science project. The casual normalcy of his words stung. I'd missed so much. Neil, we need to talk. About us, about Sarah, about everything. Silence stretched between us. Finally, Neil sighed. I know, but not over the phone. When are you coming home? Tomorrow, I said. I'm cutting the trip short. Fran, you can't keep doing that. Your job. My job isn't more important than our family, I interrupted, surprising myself with the vehemence in my voice. Another pause. Okay, Neil said softly. We'll talk tomorrow. After hanging up, I sat on the bed, overwhelmed by the weight of everything. My career was soaring, but at what cost? I thought of all the moments I'd missed, Lily's dance recitals, Tommy's baseball games, family dinners that had become increasingly rare. A knock at the door startled me. It was Jenna, a colleague I'd grown close to over the past few months. Hey, superstar, she grinned. We're all heading out for drinks to celebrate. You coming? I hesitated, torn between professional obligations and personal needs. I can't, Jenna. I need to pack. I'm heading home early. Jenna's smile faded. Fran, is everything okay? You've seemed distracted all week. Before I could stop myself, everything came pouring out. The fights with Neil, my suspicions about Sarah, the guilt over neglecting my children. Jenna listened, her face a mix of sympathy and concern. Oh, Fran, she said when I finished. I had no idea, but listen, you can't blame yourself for everything. You're an amazing mom and a brilliant professional. It's not your fault if Neil can't handle your success. Her words, meant to comfort, hit me like a punch to the gut. Was that really how I came across? So focused on my career that I'd neglected everything else? Thanks, Jenna, I managed. But I think I've lost sight of what's truly important. After Jenna left, I sat at the desk and pulled out a notepad. On one side, I wrote career. On the other, family. As I began listing pros and cons, tears blurred my vision. My phone buzzed, a text from Tommy. Miss you, Mom. Can't wait till you're home. In that moment, clarity washed over me. I knew what I had to do. I picked up my phone and dialed Richard's number. Richard, it's Francesca. I've made a decision about that senior position. As I spoke, I felt a weight lifting off my shoulders. For the first time in months, I was certain I was making the right choice. Whatever happened with Neil, whatever challenges lay ahead, I knew where my priorities needed to be. Tomorrow, I'd go home and face the music. But tonight, I'd sleep easier knowing I was finally putting my family first. The taxi pulled up to our house, and I felt a mix of relief and apprehension. I'd spent the entire flight rehearsing what I'd say to Neil, how we'd work through this rough patch. But as I approached the front door, an eerie silence enveloped me. Neil? Tommy? Lily? I called out, my voice echoing through the empty rooms. No response. Panic rising, I rushed from room to room, finding nothing but unmade beds and half-empty closets. In the kitchen, a yellow sticky note on the fridge caught my eye. Neil's hasty scrawl read, "Kids are at Mrs. Johnson's. We need to talk. I'll call you." My hands shook as I dialed Mrs. Johnson's number. "Francesca, dear," she answered. "The children are fine. Neil dropped them off yesterday, said there was a family emergency." "Yesterday," I choked out. "How long were you supposed to keep them?" A pause. "Well, Neil wasn't specific. Is everything all right?" I mumbled some excuse and hung up, my mind reeling. Neil had left our children with a neighbor indefinitely? What kind of family emergency could possibly justify this? As if on cue, my phone buzzed with a text from Neil. "I'm sorry, I couldn't do it anymore. I'm with Sarah. We'll figure out arrangements for the kids later." The world tilted on its axis. I stumbled to the couch, reading and rereading the message, unable to process the casual cruelty of his words. A knock at the door jolted me back to reality. It was Tommy and Lily, faces bright with excitement at seeing me home early. "Mom," Lily cried, throwing herself into my arms. "We missed you so much." Tommy, ever the observant one, furrowed his brow. "Where's Dad?" "Mrs. Johnson said he had to go away for a while." I swallowed hard, forcing a smile. "Your father, he had to take care of something. Squawk, but don't worry, I'm here now." As I helped them unpack, my mind raced. How could I tell them their father had abandoned us? How could I protect them from the pain I was feeling? That night, after tucking the kids in, I sat at the kitchen table staring at Neil's note. Anger, betrayal, and fear warred within me. I thought about calling him, demanding explanations, but what good would that do? Instead, I pulled out my laptop and started researching. Divorce lawyers, child custody laws, financial advisors. With each click, my resolve strengthened. Neil might have walked out on us, but I wouldn't let him destroy our family. As dawn broke, I had a plan. I'd fight for full custody, ensure financial stability for the kids, and rebuild our lives, with or without Neil. My phone buzzed again. "Neil, can we talk? I want to explain." I stared at the message, my finger hovering over the reply button. Part of me wanted to lash out, to hurt him as deeply as he'd hurt me, but a cooler, more determined part knew that engaging now would only complicate things. Instead, I typed, "All communication goes through my lawyer from now on. Expect to hear from them soon." As I hit send, I felt a strange mix of sadness and empowerment. The life I'd known was over, shattered by Neil's betrayal, but from the ashes, a stronger, more resilient Francesca was emerging. I heard stirring upstairs. The kids would be awake soon. Taking a deep breath, I stood up, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Neil might have given up on our family, but I never would. As I started preparing breakfast, my mind clear and focused for the first time in months, I made a silent vow, to my children, to myself, and to the future we'd build together. We would not just survive this, we would thrive. The coffee maker beeped, and I poured myself a cup, feeling the warmth seep into my hands. Outside, the sun was rising, painting the sky in hues of hope. It was a new day, the first day of our new life, and I was ready for it. The shrill ring of my phone pierced the quiet morning. Neil's name flashed on the screen, and my heart raced. It had been a week since he'd left, a week of sleepless nights and tear-filled days. With trembling fingers, I answered. "Fran." Neil's voice was unnervingly calm. "We need to talk about the kids." I gripped the phone tighter. "Now you want to talk? After abandoning them without a word?" "I didn't abandon them," he snapped. "I left them with Mrs. Johnson. I knew you'd be home soon." "That's not the point, Neil." My voice rose, and I glanced nervously at the stairs, hoping the kids wouldn't wake. "You left our children with a neighbor indefinitely. Do you have any idea what that's done to them, to me?" A heavy sigh crackled through the line. "I'm sorry, Fran. I didn't mean for things to happen this way, but Sarah and I—" "Don't." I cut him off, bile rising in my throat. "Don't you dare talk about her to me." "She's part of my life now, Fran. You're going to have to accept that." The casual way he said it, as if he were discussing a new job or a haircut, made something snap inside me. "Accept it? You want me to accept that you've thrown away our family for some fling?" "It's not a fling." Neil's voice hardened. "I love her, Fran. I've never felt this way before." The words hit me like a physical blow. I stumbled to the kitchen counter, gripping it for support. "What about our children, Neil? What about the vows we made?" "The kids will adjust," he said, maddeningly reasonable. "And vows, sometimes people change, Fran. You changed when you got that promotion. You were never home, always working. What did you expect? Hot tears spilled down my cheeks. So this is my fault? Because I dared to have a career? No, it's not. Look, I didn't call to argue. I want to see the kids this weekend. I'll pick them up Friday after school. Absolutely not, I hissed. You don't get to waltz in and out of their lives like nothing happened. They're my children too, Fran. You can't keep them from me. Watch me, I spat, then hung up. My hands shook as I set the phone down. The unfairness of it all threatened to overwhelm me. Neil had betrayed us, left us, and now he wanted to play happy families on the weekends? I heard movement upstairs. The kids were awake. Wiping my eyes, I tried to compose myself, but as I reached for the cereal bowls, a wave of dizziness washed over me. The room spun, and I found myself on the kitchen floor, gasping for air. Mom? Tommy's worried voice came from the doorway. Mom, are you okay? I looked up to see both my children staring at me, fear etched on their young faces. In that moment, I realized I couldn't do this alone. I couldn't be both mother and father, couldn't shield them from the pain while dealing with my own. I'm okay, sweetie, I managed, pulling myself up. Just a little tired. But as I hugged them close, I knew I was far from okay. The weight of everything, Neil's betrayal, the impending custody battle, the uncertain future, crashed down on me. I needed help. I needed support. Most of all, I needed to be strong for Tommy and Lily. With shaking hands, I reached for my phone again. This time, I dialed my parents' number. Mom? My voice cracked. I need you. Can you come? As I explained the situation through tears, I felt a tiny spark of hope. I wasn't alone in this fight. And Neil would learn that he couldn't just walk away from his responsibilities without consequences. The kids clung to me, their small arms a reminder of what I was fighting for. Whatever came next, I would face it head on, for them, for our family, for the life we deserved. The doorbell rang, and I steeled myself for what was to come. Opening the door, I found Neil's parents, Martha and George, their faces etched with concern and confusion. Francesca, dear, Martha began, her voice trembling. What's going on? Neil's not answering our calls, and when we stopped by your house, the neighbors said... I ushered them inside, my heart heavy. You'd better sit down, I said, leading them to the living room where my own parents were already waiting. As I recounted Neil's betrayal and abandonment, Martha's face crumpled, while George's reddened with anger. My mother reached out, squeezing my hand in silent support. I can't believe it, George muttered, shaking his head. Our son, how could he do this to you? To the children? Martha dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. We raised him better than this, Francesca. I'm so sorry. Their genuine shock and remorse hit me harder than I expected. I'd been bracing for denial, for them to take Neil's side. Instead, their support washed over me like a balm. We'll talk to him, George said firmly. Make him see reason. I shook my head. I appreciate that, but I don't think it'll help. Neil's made his choice. Just then my phone buzzed. A text from Neil. I'm coming to get the kids. Be there in 10. Panic surged through me. He's on his way, I choked out. He wants to take the children. My father stood up, his face set. He's not taking those kids anywhere. The next 10 minutes were a blur of activity. My parents ushered Tommy and Lily upstairs, while Neil's parents positioned themselves near the front door, ready to intercept their son. When Neil's car pulled up, I felt like I might be sick. But as he approached the house, a strange calm settled over me. This was it, the moment I'd been dreading and preparing for. Neil's face registered shock when he saw his parents. Mom? Dad? What are you doing here? We could ask you the same thing, son. George's voice was cold. What do you think you're doing? Neil's eyes darted to me. I'm here to see my children. Fran can't keep them from me. You left them, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. You abandoned our family for another woman. You don't get to waltz back in like nothing happened. I didn't abandon them, Neil shouted. I left them with a neighbor. I knew you'd be back soon. Martha stepped forward, her eyes brimming with tears. Neil, how could you? Those children need their father. They'll still have me, Neil insisted. Sarah and I, we can provide a loving home. Sarah? George's voice thundered. You're throwing away your family for some homewrecker? Neil's face hardened. Don't talk about her like that. She understands me in a way Fran never did. The words hit me like a physical blow, but I refused to let him see how much they hurt. Understanding doesn't excuse betrayal, Neil. You made vows. You have responsibilities. Vows? Neil laughed bitterly. What about your vows, Fran? You were never here, always working, always putting your career first. That's not fair, my mother interjected. Francesca has been an amazing mother and wife. Neil's eyes flashed. Stay out of this. It's between me and Fran. No, I said firmly. It's not just between us anymore. You involved our children the moment you walked out that door. I could see Neil's resolve wavering as he looked from face to face, realizing he was outnumbered. But then his expression hardened again. Fine, he spat. Have it your way. But this isn't over, Fran. I'll see you in court. As Neil stormed back to his car, I felt my knees buckle. My parents rushed to support me, while Martha and George looked on, their faces a mix of shame and sorrow. I'm so sorry, Martha whispered. We'll do whatever we can to help. George nodded firmly. We're here for you and the kids, Francesca. Whatever you need. As the reality of what just happened sank in, I realized this was just the beginning. The real battle, for custody, for financial support, for our children's future, was still to come. But looking at the supportive faces around me, I knew I wasn't in this fight alone. Taking a deep breath, I straightened my shoulders. Thank you, I said. I'm going to need all the help I can get. 6 months had passed since Neil walked out, and our lives had settled into a new rhythm. My parents had moved into a nearby apartment, becoming a constant source of support and love for the kids. Neil's parents, true to their word, had been equally supportive, often stepping in to help with childcare and emotional support. As I sat in the courtroom, waiting for our final custody hearing to begin, I felt a strange mix of anxiety and determination. Neil sat across the aisle looking uncomfortable in his suit. Sarah, his new friend, was noticeably absent. Our lawyer, a formidable woman named Diane, leaned over. Remember, Francesca, stay calm. We have a strong case. I nodded, my eyes fixed on the judge as she entered the courtroom. This was it, the moment that would define our future. As the proceedings began, I listened with growing disbelief as Neil's lawyer painted a picture of me as a career-obsessed mother who had neglected her family. They brought up my long hours, my business trips, even my recent promotion. When it was our turn, Diane stood, her voice clear and confident. Your Honor, my client has been nothing but a devoted mother. Her career success doesn't diminish her parenting, it enhances it. She provides stability, financial security, and a strong role model for her children. She then presented evidence of Neil's abandonment, his sporadic visits, and his failure to provide consistent child support. As she spoke, I saw Neil's face grow increasingly pale. The judge listened intently, her expression unreadable. When both sides had presented their cases, she called a brief recess to consider her decision. Those 15 minutes felt like an eternity. I closed my eyes, thinking of Tommy and Lily, of all we'd been through. Whatever happened, I knew I'd never stop fighting for them. When the judge returned, the courtroom fell silent. After careful consideration, she began, I've reached a decision. Primary custody will be awarded to Francesca Carter, with Neil Carter granted visitation rights every other weekend and shared holidays. Relief washed over me like a tidal wave. I barely heard the rest of the judge's words as she outlined the child support arrangements and other details. As we left the courtroom, Neil approached me, his face a mix of emotions. Fran, I'm sorry for everything. I looked at him, this man I'd once loved, now a stranger. I'm not the one you need to apologize to, Neil. It's our children who've suffered the most. He nodded, looking genuinely remorseful for the first time. I know, I want to make things right with them. Can we work something out? Beyond what the court ordered? I considered his words carefully. For the kids' sake, I'm willing to try. But you need to prove yourself, Neil. They need consistency, not just promises. As Neil walked away, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. We had a long road ahead, but for the first time in months, I felt hope for our future. Outside the courthouse, my parents and Neil's were waiting. Their faces lit up when they saw my expression. We won, I said simply, and was engulfed in a group hug. As we drove home, my mother squeezed my hand. I'm so proud of you, sweetheart. You've shown such strength through all of this. I smiled, thinking of the journey we'd been on. I couldn't have done it without all of you. Walking into our house, my house now, I was greeted by the excited shouts of Tommy and Lily. As I hugged them close, I realized that this was the true victory. Not the court decision, but the love and resilience of our little family. That night, as I tucked the kids into bed, Lily looked up at me with serious eyes. "Mom, are we going to be okay?" I kissed her forehead, my heart full. "Yes, sweetheart. We're going to be more than okay. We're going to be wonderful." As I closed their bedroom door, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but we'd face it together. Neil's betrayal had shaken our world, but it hadn't broken us. Instead, it had revealed a strength I never knew I had. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight, surrounded by the love of my family, I knew we could handle anything life threw our way. We weren't just survivors, we were thrivers, and our story was far from over. I smoothed my dress and plastered on a smile as I stepped into Ruth's backyard. The baby shower decorations sparkled in the afternoon sun, but my stomach churned with dread. I was late, and I knew Eric would be annoyed. "There you are," Ruth's voice rang out. We were starting to worry. I hugged my daughter, my hand resting on her swollen belly. "Sorry, sweetheart. The salon was crazy today." Ruth's eyes twinkled. "No worries, Mom. There's someone here who's been asking about you." Before I could respond, a familiar voice called out, "Surprise, Annabelle! Guess who's joined us?" I turned, my heart pounding. There stood Bethany, my best friend since college, grinning from ear to ear. But it wasn't her unexpected presence that made my blood run cold. It was the man standing next to her, his arm draped possessively around her waist. "Eric, my husband." "Bethany," I managed, my voice barely above a whisper. "What a surprise." She rushed forward, enveloping me in a hug. "Oh, Annabelle, it's been too long. I have so much to tell you." I stood frozen as she pulled back, her hand resting on a slight bump beneath her flowing dress. My eyes darted between her and Eric, who avoided my gaze. "Eric and I have some exciting news," Bethany gushed. "We're having a baby." The world tilted on its axis. I gripped the nearby table for support, knocking over a stack of pastel plates. "Mom?" Ruth's concerned voice broke through the fog. "Are you okay?" I forced a smile. "Just a little dizzy. Must be the heat." Eric finally met my eyes, his expression a mix of defiance and guilt. "Annabelle, we need to talk." "Not here," I hissed, glancing around at the curious faces of our friends and family. Bethany's smile faltered. "Is everything all right?" I couldn't bear to look at her. My best friend, the godmother to my children. How long had this been going on? "Excuse me," I mumbled, pushing past them and heading for the house. Eric followed me inside, closing the door behind us. "Annabelle, I can explain." I whirled on him, fury replacing shock. "Explain? Explain how you've been sleeping with my best friend? How you're having a baby with her?" He held up his hands. "It's not what you think. Bethany doesn't know we're still married." I laughed bitterly. "And that makes it better? How long, Eric? How long have you been lying to both of us?" He ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident. "It just happened. I ran into her at a conference 6 months ago, and things escalated." 6 months, I repeated, the betrayal cutting deep. "While I've been working myself to the bone, trying to save our marriage, you've been—" A knock at the door interrupted us. Ruth poked her head in, concern etched on her face. "Mom? Dad? Is everything okay?" I plastered on another fake smile. "Everything's fine, sweetheart. Your father and I just need a moment." Ruth hesitated, her eyes darting between us. "Are you sure? You both look upset." Eric stepped forward, his charm sliding back into place. "Don't worry, princess. Just a little misunderstanding. We'll be right out." As soon as the door closed, I turned back to Eric. "This ends now. You go out there and tell Bethany the truth, or I will." His eyes hardened. "You wouldn't dare. Think about what that would do to Ruth's party, to our family." "Our family?" I scoffed. "You gave up the right to talk about our family when you decided to start a new one with my best friend." Eric grabbed my arm, his grip painfully tight. "Listen to me, Annabelle. If you say anything, you'll regret it. Think about the scandal, the gossip. Is that what you want?" I wrenched my arm free, shock and anger coursing through me. "Don't you dare threaten me, Eric. This is far from over." With that, I stormed out of the house, leaving Eric behind. As I stepped back into the sunlight, I locked eyes with Bethany across the yard. Her smile faltered, sensing the tension. In that moment, I knew nothing would ever be the same again. I couldn't sleep that night, tossing and turning as memories of happier times haunted me. The next morning, I dragged myself to the salon, hoping work would distract me from the mess my life had become. "You look like hell, sweetie," Mom said as I stumbled in. "Rough night?" I nodded, fighting back tears. You have no idea. She studied my face, concern etched in her features. What's going on, Annabelle? Did something happen at Ruth's shower? Before I could answer, the bell chimed. Eric sauntered in, all charm and smiles. Good morning, ladies. Annabelle, can we talk? Mom's eyes darted between us. I'll give you two a moment, she said, retreating to the back room. I crossed my arms, glaring at Eric. What do you want? He leaned close, lowering his voice. I need you to keep quiet about Bethany, just for a little while. Are you kidding me? I hissed. You want me to pretend everything's fine while you play happy families with my best friend? Eric's eyes hardened. Think about Ruth. Do you really want to ruin her pregnancy with all this drama? I faltered, torn between my anger and concern for our daughter. Eric pressed his advantage. Just give me some time to figure things out, for Ruth's sake. Before I could respond, Mom reappeared. Everything okay out here? Eric flashed his winning smile. Just fine, Gwen. I was telling Annabelle about a business trip next week. I'll be gone for a few days. My stomach churned. A few days alone with Bethany, no doubt. As Eric left, Mom turned to me. Honey, what's really going on? I opened my mouth to tell her everything, but Eric's words about Ruth echoed in my mind. It's complicated, I said finally. I'll explain later. The day dragged on, each client reminding me of happier times. Mrs. Johnson gushed about her grandson's wedding, while I wondered if my own marriage had been a sham from the start. As I swept up hair clippings, my phone buzzed. A text from Bethany. Lunch tomorrow? We need to catch up. My hand shook as I replied, agreeing to meet. I had to know the truth, no matter how much it hurt. That night, I found myself digging through old photo albums. There we were, Eric, Bethany, and me, arms linked on graduation day. Young, carefree, and impossibly close. A photo slipped out, landing face down on the floor. I picked it up, my breath catching. It was from my wedding day, Eric and I kissing, while Bethany beamed beside us as maid of honor. Anger surged through me. How dare they destroy everything we had? I stormed into our bedroom, where Eric was packing for his business trip. How long? I demanded. He looked up, startled. What? I thrust the wedding photo in his face. How long have you been sleeping with Bethany? Eric's face darkened. I told you, it just happened recently. Why can't you let it go? Let it go? I laughed bitterly. You're having a baby with her. Eric, did our vows mean nothing to you? He slammed his suitcase shut. Oh, please, like you're so innocent. Always working late, never having time for me. What was I supposed to do? I recoiled as if slapped. So this is my fault because I was building a career? Eric's voice dripped with disdain. Pregnancy isn't an excuse to be lazy, Annabelle. Some of us have real jobs to do. Something snapped inside me. I grabbed the nearest object, a framed photo of us, and hurled it at the wall. It shattered, glass flying everywhere. Eric's eyes widened in shock, then narrowed dangerously. He grabbed my arm, fingers digging in painfully. You need to calm down, he growled. I wrenched away, heart pounding. Don't touch me, I spat. Get out, now. For a moment I thought he might refuse. Then, without a word, he grabbed his suitcase and stormed out. As the front door slammed, I sank to the floor, surrounded by broken glass and shattered memories. Tears streamed down my face as the full weight of betrayal crashed over me. But beneath the pain, a spark of determination flickered to life. I wouldn't let Eric destroy me. Somehow I'd find the strength to fight back. Tomorrow's lunch with Bethany loomed large in my mind. One way or another, I'd get to the bottom of this mess and reclaim my dignity in the process. I woke up with a knot in my stomach, dreading my lunch with Bethany. As I got ready, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Call it women's intuition or just paranoia, but I decided to do some digging before meeting her. I rifled through Eric's dresser, searching for any clue that might shed light on his deception. That's when I found them. A pair of pink, wireless headphones tucked beneath his socks. My heart sank. I'd given those to Bethany for her birthday last year. My phone buzzed with a text from Bethany. Can't wait to see you. Lots to catch up on. I typed back a quick reply, postponing our lunch. I needed answers, and I needed them now. When Eric came home that evening, I was waiting. Care to explain these? I asked, dangling the headphones in front of him. His face paled. Where did you get those? Does it matter? They're Bethany's, aren't they? Eric's expression hardened. You've been snooping through my things? I laughed bitterly. That's rich, coming from you. How long has this really been going on, Eric? And don't you dare lie to me again. He ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident. Fine. It's been about a year. Happy now? The room spun. A year. While I'd been working overtime to support our family, he'd been sneaking around with my best friend. Why? I choked out. Why her? Why throw away everything we built? Eric's eyes flashed with anger. Because she doesn't nag me constantly. She doesn't make me feel like a failure every time I come home. I never. Save it, he snapped. You've been so wrapped up in your precious salon, you barely noticed me anymore. Bethany actually listens. She supports me. Rage boiled inside me. And I suppose lying to her about still being married is your way of supporting her? Eric's face darkened. He grabbed my arm, fingers digging in painfully. If you breathe a word of this to Bethany, I swear. I wrenched away, heart pounding. You'll what? Hit me? Go ahead, give me another reason to leave your sorry ass. For a moment, I thought he might actually do it. Then he deflated, sinking onto the bed. This is such a mess, he muttered. You think? I spat. You ruined everything. Our marriage, my friendship with Bethany, our family. He looked up sharply. You can't tell Ruth. It would destroy her. I laughed humorlessly. Oh, now you care about our daughter? Where was that concern when you were screwing my best friend? Eric stood, looming over me. I'm warning you, Annabelle. If you keep prying, you'll regret it. Think about Ruth. Think about the scandal. A chill ran down my spine. This wasn't the man I married. The Eric I knew would never threaten me. Get out, I whispered. What? Get out, I screamed, shoving him towards the door. I can't even look at you right now. Eric's eyes narrowed. Fine, but this isn't over. We need to figure out how to handle this, discreetly. As soon as he left, I collapsed on the bed, sobs racking my body. How had my life fallen apart so completely? When the tears finally subsided, a steely resolve took their place. I couldn't let Eric control the narrative any longer. It was time to take matters into my own hands. I picked up my phone, fingers hovering over Bethany's number. She deserved to know the truth, no matter how much it hurt. But as I was about to call, another text from her popped up. Everything okay? You've seemed off lately. I'm worried about you. My throat tightened. Despite everything, a part of me still cared for Bethany. Could I really shatter her world like this? I set the phone down, mind racing. I needed a plan, one that would expose Eric's lies without destroying everyone I loved in the process. As I stared at the pink headphones on the bed, a dangerous idea began to form. It was risky, maybe even a little crazy. But if it worked, I could finally reclaim control of my life and protect the people I cared about. Tomorrow, I decided. Tomorrow I'd set things in motion. And God help Eric when I did. I woke up the next morning with a renewed sense of purpose. No more tears, no more self-pity. It was time to take action. First order of business. Document everything. I grabbed my phone and started snapping pictures of Bethany's headphones, Eric's text messages, anything that could prove his infidelity. My hands shook as I worked, but I pressed on. Next, I called my bank. I need to open a separate account, I told the teller, my voice steadier than I felt. One that my husband can't access. As I hung up, a text from Eric flashed across my screen. We need to talk. Coming home early. Panic surged through me. I wasn't ready to face him yet. I needed more time, more evidence. Without thinking, I dialed my dad's number. Honey, his warm voice answered. Everything okay? I broke down, spilling everything. Eric's affair, the baby, his threats. Dad listened silently, then said, Come over. Now. I threw some clothes in a bag and raced to my parents' house. Mom and Dad were waiting on the porch, concern etched on their faces. Oh, sweetheart, Mom said, pulling me into a hug. We're here for you. Dad's expression was thunderous. I'll kill him, he growled. No, Dad, I said firmly. I need to handle this myself. We spent the afternoon strategizing. Mom, ever practical, insisted I see a lawyer. You need to protect yourself and your assets, she urged. As evening fell, my phone buzzed incessantly with calls and texts from Eric. I ignored them all. You can't avoid him forever, Dad said gently. What's your plan? I took a deep breath. I'm going to sell the house. Mom gasped. Are you sure? I nodded. It's the only way. I need a fresh start, away from all the memories. The next morning I met with a real estate agent. I need to sell my house urgently, I told her, my voice filled with determination. She looked skeptical. These things take time, Mrs. Thompson, and don't you need your husband's signature? I swallowed hard. He'll sign. Trust me, As I left the agent's office, my phone rang. It was Bethany. My stomach churned as I answered. Annabelle? Her voice was small, uncertain. I really need to talk to you. Can we meet? I closed my eyes, torn between my anger and our years of friendship. Okay, I said finally. Coffee shop on Main, in an hour. Bethany was already there when I arrived, nervously fidgeting with her cup. She looked up, her eyes red-rimmed. I'm so sorry, she blurted out. I didn't know, I swear I didn't know he was still married. I sat down heavily, the weight of her words sinking in. Tell me everything, I said. As Bethany spoke, painting a picture of Eric's elaborate web of lies, my resolve strengthened. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about protecting Bethany, her unborn child, and my own future. What are you going to do? Bethany asked, her voice trembling. I met her gaze steadily. I'm leaving him, and I think you should too. She nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. I'm so sorry, Annabelle. Can you ever forgive me? Before I could answer, my phone buzzed. A text from Eric. Where are you? We need to talk now. I showed Bethany the message, watching her face pale. He doesn't know we're together, does he? She whispered. An idea sparked in my mind. Dangerous, perhaps, but potentially game-changing. No, I said slowly, and maybe that's exactly what we need. I turned to Bethany, a plan forming. Are you with me? I asked. Really with me? Because what I'm thinking could change everything. She hesitated for a moment, then nodded firmly. I'm in, whatever it takes. As we bent our heads together, plotting our next move, I felt a strange mix of fear and exhilaration. The road ahead would be difficult, but for the first time in months, I felt a glimmer of hope. Eric had no idea what was coming, and that was exactly how I wanted it. My hands trembled as I stood on Eric's parents' doorstep, a folder of damning evidence clutched to my chest. I'd known Louise and George for years, but this visit felt like stepping into enemy territory. Louise answered, her face lighting up. Annabelle, dear, what a lovely surprise. I forced a smile. Louise, we need to talk. It's about Eric. Her expression faltered. Is everything all right? No, I said softly. It's not. Inside, I spread the photos across their coffee table. Eric and Bethany together, text messages, bank statements showing suspicious transactions. Louise's hand flew to her mouth while George's face darkened with each revelation. There's more, I said, my voice shaking. Bethany's pregnant. Eric's the father. Louise collapsed onto the sofa, her shoulders heaving with silent sobs. George paced the room, muttering under his breath. How long? Louise finally asked. A year, at least, I replied. Maybe longer. George slammed his fist on the table, making us both jump. I'll kill him, he growled. My own son, how could he? I touched his arm gently. There's something else you should know. I took a deep breath. Eric's been violent. He threatened me when I confronted him. Louise's head snapped up, her eyes wide with horror. No, she whispered. Not my Eric. As if on cue, the front door burst open. Eric strode in, his face contorted with rage. What the hell is going on here? For a moment, no one spoke. Then Louise stood, her small frame shaking with fury. How dare you? She hissed. How dare you come into this house after what you've done? Eric's eyes darted between us, realization dawning. Annabelle, he snarled. You had no right. She had every right, George roared, stepping between us. You're the one who's destroyed this family, boy. Eric lunged forward, but George caught him by the shirt collar. Don't you dare, he warned. You're not the son we raised. You're not our son anymore. Louise's anguished cry pierced the air. He's right, she sobbed. I don't know who you are, but you're not my Eric. I watched, stunned, as Eric's world crumbled around him. His parents' rejection seemed to hit him harder than any accusation I could have made. Mom, he pleaded. Dad, please, let me explain. There's nothing to explain, George said coldly. Get out of our house, now. As Eric turned to leave, his eyes met mine. The hatred I saw there chilled me to the bone. This isn't over, he hissed. The door slammed behind him, leaving us in stunned silence. Louise crumpled to the floor, her body racked with sobs. I knelt beside her, my own tears falling freely. I'm so sorry, I whispered. I never wanted this to happen. George helped Louise to the couch, then turned to me. No, Annabelle, we're the ones who should be sorry. We had no idea. Louise grasped my hand. What can we do? How can we help? I hesitated, then decided to lay all my cards on the table. I'm selling the house, I said. I need to start over, somewhere Eric can't find me. They exchanged a glance, then George nodded firmly. We'll help. Whatever you need. As we sat there, planning my escape and Eric's comeuppance, I felt a strange mix of grief and relief. I'd lost my husband, but I'd gained unexpected allies. My phone buzzed, a text from Bethany. "Eric's on the warpath. He knows we've been talking. What do we do?" I looked up at Louise and George, their faces etched with concern and determination. In that moment, I knew what I had to do next. "We end this," I said, my voice stronger than I felt. "Once and for all." I typed a quick reply to Bethany. "Meet me at the house in an hour. Bring everything you have on Eric. It's time to take control." As I hit send, I felt a surge of adrenaline. The stakes had never been higher, but for the first time, I truly believed I could win this fight. My heart raced as I paced the living room, waiting for Bethany to arrive. The house that had once been my sanctuary now felt like a trap, filled with memories of Eric's betrayal. When the doorbell rang, I nearly jumped out of my skin. Bethany stood on the porch, her face pale and drawn. "Annabelle, I'm so sorry," she began, but I cut her off. "Not now. We need to focus." I ushered her inside, glancing nervously at the street. "Did anyone see you come here?" She shook her head. "I don't think so. Annabelle, what's going on? Eric's been calling me non-stop, threatening." "I know," I interrupted. "That's why we need to end this. Today." I laid out my plan, watching Bethany's eyes widen with each detail. When I finished, she sat in stunned silence. "It's risky," she finally said. "It's our only chance," I replied. "Are you with me?" After a moment's hesitation, she nodded. "I'm in." We spent the next hour preparing, gathering evidence and steeling our nerves. As I set up my laptop for the video call, my phone buzzed. A text from Eric. "On my way home, we need to talk." I exchanged a glance with Bethany. "It's time." With trembling fingers, I dialed Eric's number, putting the call on speaker. He answered on the first ring. "Where the hell are you?" he snarled. "I'm at home," I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. "And I'm not alone." There was a pause. "What do you mean?" "Bethany's here, Eric, and we know everything." I could hear his sharp intake of breath. "Don't do anything stupid, Annabelle. I'm almost there." "Good," I said, "because we have a lot to discuss." I ended the call and turned to Bethany. "Ready?" She nodded, her face set with determination. Minutes later, we heard Eric's car pull into the driveway. The front door slammed open and he stormed into the living room, his face contorted with rage. "What the hell is going on?" he demanded. I stood my ground. "It's over, Eric. We know about your lies, your manipulation, all of it." His eyes darted between us. "I don't know what you think you know, but—" "Save it," Bethany cut in. "We've compared notes. We know you've been playing us both." Eric's facade cracked. "You don't understand," he pleaded. "I love you both. I never meant to hurt anyone." I laughed bitterly. "Love? Is that what you call this?" I gestured to the bruise on my arm from our last confrontation. Eric's eyes narrowed. "You pushed me," he hissed. "If you had just left well enough alone." "Enough!" I shouted. "No more excuses, no more lies." I turned to my laptop and hit a button. Suddenly, the faces of Eric's parents appeared on the screen. Eric stumbled back. "Mom? Dad?" "What?" "We've heard everything, son," George said, his voice heavy with disappointment. "How could you do this?" Louise's eyes were filled with tears. "That we raised you better than this, Eric?" As Eric sputtered excuses, I played my final card. "There's more," I said, my voice shaking. "Tell them, Bethany." Bethany stepped forward, her hand resting protectively on her stomach. "I'm pregnant, Eric, and I'm keeping the baby." The room fell silent. Eric's face drained of color as he looked from Bethany to me, then to his parents on the screen. I can explain," he stammered. "There's nothing to explain," I said firmly. "We're done, Eric, all of us." Suddenly, Eric lunged forward, grabbing my arm. "You can't do this to me," he shouted. I wrenched away, fear and adrenaline coursing through me. "Don't touch me." As Eric advanced, his face twisted with rage. Bethany stepped between us. "That's enough," she yelled. "You've deceived both of us, Eric. There's no future for us. Any of us." Eric's parents were shouting from the computer screen, begging him to stop. The room spun around me as the full weight of the situation crashed down. Just as Eric reached for me again, a sharp pain ripped through my abdomen. I gasped, doubling over. "Annabelle?" Bethany's voice sounded far away. "What's wrong?" I looked up, meeting Eric's shocked gaze. "The baby," I whispered. "Something's wrong with the baby." As darkness closed in around me, I heard Bethany calling for an ambulance. The last thing I saw was Eric's face, a mix of anger and fear, before everything went black. The harsh fluorescent lights of the hospital corridor burned my eyes as I was rushed through on a gurney. Pain ripped through my abdomen, each contraction more intense than the last. Bethany ran alongside me, her face a mask of worry. "Hang in there, Annabelle," she urged. "You're going to be okay." I wanted to believe her, but fear gripped my heart. It was too early. The baby wasn't due for weeks. As we burst through the doors of the delivery room, I caught a glimpse of Eric in the waiting area, his face pale and drawn. Our eyes met for a brief moment before the doors swung shut. The next few hours passed in a blur of pain, fear, and frantic medical activity. I heard snatches of conversation, premature labor, fetal distress, emergency C-section, but couldn't focus on anything beyond the next breath, the next push. "We need to get the baby out now," the doctor's voice cut through the haze. "Mrs. Thompson, we're prepping you for surgery." Panic surged through me. "No, please," I gasped. "I want to do this naturally." The doctor's eyes were kind but firm. "I'm sorry, but we don't have a choice. Your baby's life is at risk." As they wheeled me towards the operating room, I saw my parents rushing down the hallway. Mom's eyes were red-rimmed, Dad's jaw set with worry. "We're here, sweetheart," Mom called out. "We love you." The anesthesia took hold, and I drifted into a fitful sleep. When I awoke, the room was quiet except for the steady beep of monitors. My body felt heavy, disconnected. "Annabelle?" Bethany's voice came from beside me. "Can you hear me?" I turned my head, wincing at the movement. "The baby?" I croaked. Bethany's eyes filled with tears. "She's in the NICU. She's so tiny, Annabelle, but she's fighting." Relief and fear warred within me. My daughter was alive, but not out of danger. "I want to see her," I said, trying to sit up. "Soon," Bethany promised. "The doctors want you to rest first." As if summoned by our conversation, a nurse entered, followed by Eric. My body tensed instinctively. "What are you doing here?" I hissed. Eric held up his hands. "I just wanted to make sure you and the baby were okay." "We're fine," I snapped. "No thanks to you." The nurse looked between us, sensing the tension. "Mr. Thompson, perhaps you should wait outside." Eric hesitated, then nodded. But before he left, he turned back to me. "Annabelle, I know I've made terrible mistakes, but seeing you like this, I realize what really matters. Can we talk, please?" For a moment, I was tempted. The familiar pull of our shared history, the dream of what our family could have been, tugged at my heart. But then I remembered the lies, the betrayal, the fear. "Our marriage is over, Eric," I said, my voice stronger than I felt. "There's no turning back. The only thing that matters now is our daughter." Eric's face crumpled, but I steeled myself against pity. "I think you should go," I said quietly. As Eric left, Bethany squeezed my hand. "You did it," she whispered. "You stood up to him." I nodded, exhausted but determined. "It's time to focus on the future, my daughter's future." Just then the doctor entered. "Mrs. Thompson, would you like to meet your daughter now?" My heart leapt. "Yes, please." As they wheeled me to the NICU, I felt a mix of emotions I couldn't quite name. Fear for my tiny, fragile baby, anger at Eric for putting us through this stress, relief that the confrontation was over, and underneath it all, a growing sense of strength. When I saw her for the first time, so small in her incubator, tubes and wires everywhere, I felt my world shift. Nothing else mattered. Not Eric's betrayal, not the drama of the past few months. All that mattered was this tiny fighter, my daughter. I pressed my hand against the incubator, tears streaming down my face. "Hello, little one," I whispered. "I'm your mom, and I promise, no matter what happens, I'll always be here for you." In that moment, I knew. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever Eric might try to do, I would face them. For her. For us. Our new life was just beginning. 6 months after that harrowing night in the hospital, I stood in the nursery of my new home, cradling my daughter Lily. The soft glow of the nightlight illuminated her peaceful face as I rocked her gently. A quiet knock at the door made me turn. Bethany stood there, her own baby bump now prominently visible. "Need any help?" she whispered. I shook my head, smiling. "We're good. How are you feeling?" "Like a beached whale," she chuckled softly. "But happy." As I laid Lily in her crib, I marveled at how much had changed. The house we now shared was smaller than my old one, but it was filled with more love and laughter than I'd known in years. We made our way to the living room, where the remnants of our housewarming party still lingered. My parents had insisted on throwing it, a celebration of new beginnings. "I still can't believe we're doing this," Bethany said, sinking onto the couch. If someone had told me a year ago that we'd be living together, raising our kids. I know, I agreed. It's not exactly how I pictured my life turning out, but honestly, I wouldn't change it for the world. The sound of a car pulling up made us both tense. We exchanged a glance, knowing who it must be. I'll get it, I said, squaring my shoulders. Eric stood on the porch, looking uncomfortable. I'm here to drop off the last of the divorce papers, he said, not quite meeting my eyes. I took the envelope, feeling a mix of emotions. Anger, yes, but also a strange sense of pity. Eric looked lost, diminished somehow. How's Lily? He asked hesitantly. She's perfect, I replied, growing stronger every day. He nodded, then glanced past me to where Bethany stood in the doorway, his face twisted with regret. I'm sorry, he said softly. To both of you. I know it doesn't change anything, but I truly am sorry. For a moment I was tempted to slam the door in his face, but then I thought of Lily, of the future I wanted for her. A future free from bitterness and resentment. Thank you for saying that, I said finally. I hope you find peace, Eric, and I hope you'll be a good father to Lily, even if we can't be together. He nodded, blinking back tears. I'll try. I promise I'll try. As Eric drove away, Bethany came to stand beside me. You okay? She asked, putting an arm around my shoulders. I took a deep breath, feeling a weight lift that I hadn't even realized I'd been carrying. Yeah, I said. I really am. We went back inside, where I carefully placed the divorce papers on the coffee table. They represented the end of one chapter, but the beginning of so many more. You know, Bethany said thoughtfully, a year ago, I thought I'd lost everything. My relationship, my best friend, my future. But now we're building something even better, I finished for her. She smiled, her eyes shining. Together, we can build a better life for our kids, for ourselves. As if on cue, Lily's cry echoed from the nursery. I stood up, ready to go to her, but Bethany waved me off. I've got this, she said. You rest. Watching her waddle down the hall, I felt a surge of affection and gratitude. We'd been through hell, Bethany and I, but we'd come out stronger. We'd created a family of our own choosing, built on trust, understanding, and shared experiences. I picked up a framed photo from the side table, Lily and me in the hospital, surrounded by my parents, Bethany, and even Eric's parents. Louise and George had become unexpected allies, doting grandparents determined to make up for their son's mistakes. The future wasn't perfect or certain. There would be challenges ahead. Co-parenting with Eric, helping Bethany through her pregnancy, juggling work and motherhood. But for the first time in a long time, I felt ready to face whatever came our way. As Bethany's soft lullaby drifted from the nursery, I closed my eyes and smiled. This was home, this was family, and together we were unbreakable. I stared at Jack, my husband of 15 years, wondering if I'd heard him correctly. You want us to move in with your mother? The words felt foreign on my tongue, like a phrase from a language I'd never learned. Jack's eyes darted away from mine, focusing on the framed photo of us on our wedding day. It's just temporary, Claire. Mom's having a hard time since Dad passed. She needs us. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my racing heart. And what about what we need, Jack? What about our plans? He shrugged, a gesture that spoke volumes about his indifference. Plans change. Mom's alone now. It's the right thing to do. The right thing. How many times had I heard that phrase throughout our marriage? I bit back a bitter laugh. And what does Susan think about this? She's thrilled, Jack said, a hint of a smile playing at his lips. Says it'll be like old times. Old times. When Jack was her perfect little boy, and I was just the interloper who'd stolen him away. I could already imagine Susan's critical gaze, her thinly veiled barbs about my shortcomings as a wife and daughter-in-law. Jack, I don't think. He cut me off with a wave of his hand. It's decided, Claire. We're moving next week. I felt the floor shift beneath my feet. Next week? But that's so soon. What about my job? Our house? You can commute, he said, as if it were the simplest thing in the world. And we'll rent out the house. It'll be good for us, you'll see. I wanted to scream, to throw something, to make him understand how ridiculous this all sounded. But years of keeping the peace had trained me well. Instead, I nodded, feeling like a coward. I need some air, I muttered, grabbing my keys and heading for the door. Where are you going? Jack called after me. For a walk, I said, not bothering to look back. The crisp autumn air hit me like a slap to the face as I stepped outside. I walked aimlessly, my mind racing with all the implications of Jack's announcement. How had we gotten here? When had my opinions, my desires become so insignificant? Lost in thought, I nearly collided with my neighbor Sarah. "Whoa there, Claire," she said, steadying me. "You okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." I forced a smile. "Just got some surprising news. Jack wants us to move in with his mother." Sarah's eyes widened. "Susan, the woman who called you a barren disappointment at your last Christmas dinner?" I winced at the memory. "That's the one." "Oh, honey," Sarah said, pulling me into a hug. "What are you going to do?" "I don't know," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "I don't seem to have much choice in the matter." Sarah pulled back, her hands on my shoulders. "There's always a choice, Claire. You just have to be brave enough to make it." As I walked home, Sarah's words echoed in my mind. I'd spent so long trying to be the perfect wife, to make everyone else happy. Maybe it was time to start thinking about my own happiness. I was so lost in thought that I almost missed the unfamiliar car parked in our driveway. As I approached, I saw Jack emerge from the house, followed by a woman I'd never seen before. They were laughing, heads close together in conspiratorial intimacy. My heart stopped as I watched Jack lean in and kiss her cheek, his hand lingering on her waist. The woman climbed into her car and Jack waved goodbye, a smile on his face I hadn't seen in years. As the car pulled away, Jack turned and saw me standing there. The smile vanished, replaced by a look of panic. "Claire," he said, his voice strained, "I can explain." But in that moment I realized there was nothing left to explain. The perfect life I'd been desperately clinging to had been an illusion all along, and now, standing in the fading light of day, I knew that everything was about to change. The moving van pulled away, leaving me standing in Susan's driveway, surrounded by boxes and the suffocating weight of my new reality. Jack was already inside, probably basking in his mother's adoration. I took a deep breath and stepped through the front door, bracing myself for what lay ahead. "There you are, Claire." Susan's voice rang out, sharp as a knife. "I was beginning to think you'd changed your mind." I forced a smile, just making sure we didn't forget anything. Susan's eyes narrowed. "Well, don't just stand there. Start unpacking. I want this mess cleared up before dinner." As I lugged boxes upstairs, I caught snippets of Jack and Susan's conversation from the kitchen. Their laughter felt like a personal affront, a reminder of my outsider status in this house. "Claire?" Jack called. "Can you come down here for a sec?" I descended the stairs, my guard up. Jack and Susan were seated at the kitchen table, matching expressions of false concern on their faces. "Honey," Jack began, his tone sickeningly sweet, "Mom and I were talking, and we think it might be best if you take the guest room for now." I blinked, sure I'd misheard. "Excuse me?" Susan jumped in. "It's just that Jack's old room is rather small for two, and well, with your difficulties, we thought you might appreciate the extra space." My difficulties. As if my struggle to conceive was a personal failing, a defect to be hidden away in the guest room. "And where will you sleep, Jack?" I asked, already knowing the answer. He at least had the decency to look uncomfortable. "I'll take my old room. It'll be easier for work, you know?" I bit my tongue, tasting blood. This was about more than sleeping arrangements. This was about erasing me, bit by bit, from their perfect family picture. "Fine," I said, my voice eerily calm. "I'll take the guest room." As I turned to leave, Susan called out, "Oh, and Claire, be a dear and start on dinner, won't you? I'm famished." That night, lying alone in the cold guest room, I replayed the scene I'd witnessed in our driveway. The woman, the kiss, Jack's panicked expression when he saw me. I'd been too shocked then to confront him, but now, anger bubbled up inside me. I crept downstairs, intent on finally having it out with Jack. But as I approached his door, I heard hushed voices. "You need to be more careful, Jack," Susan whispered. "What if Claire had seen you?" My breath caught in my throat. "Don't worry, Mom," Jack replied. "Claire doesn't suspect a thing. She's too busy trying to be the perfect wife to notice what's right in front of her." I stumbled back, my hand over my mouth to stifle a gasp. Susan knew. She'd known all along about Jack's affair, and worse, she was helping him hide it. Rage, hot and fierce, coursed through me. I wanted to burst into the room, to scream and throw things, but a small, calculating voice in my head held me back. If I confronted them now, they'd only deny it. No, I needed proof. I needed to play their game better than they did. Back in the guest room, I pulled out my phone and dialed Sarah's number. "Claire?" She answered, groggy with sleep. "What's wrong?" "I need your help," I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "I'm going to take down Jack and Susan, and I need you to be my alibi." There was a pause. Then Sarah's voice came back, fully alert. "I'm listening." As I outlined my plan, a sense of purpose washed over me. For years, I'd let Jack and Susan dictate my life, my worth. But no more. They thought they had me cornered, isolated in this house of lies. But they'd underestimated me. Let them think I was the perfect, obedient wife. Let them believe I was clueless and weak. I'd play the part, all while gathering the evidence I needed to blow their carefully constructed world apart. The game was on, and this time I intended to win. The fertility clinic's waiting room was a study in quiet desperation. I sat alone, surrounded by couples holding hands and whispering encouragement. Jack had begged off, claiming an important meeting. I knew better now. "Claire Thompson?" The nurse's voice cut through my thoughts. I followed her to the examination room, my heart heavy. Dr. Patel greeted me with a sympathetic smile. "I'm afraid I don't have good news, Claire," she said gently. "The latest round of treatments hasn't been successful." I nodded, numb. How many times had I sat in this room hoping for a miracle? "Have you and Jack considered other options?" Dr. Patel asked. "There are still avenues we could explore." "I'll discuss it with him," I lied, knowing full well that Jack had lost interest in our fertility journey long ago. As I left the clinic, my phone buzzed. A text from Susan, "Dinner at 6. Don't be late." I arrived home to find Susan in the kitchen, a whirlwind of activity. "There you are," she said, barely looking up. "Start chopping those vegetables. Jack's bringing a guest." My stomach clenched. "A guest?" "Yes, his new assistant. Amanda, I think her name is. Lovely girl." I nearly sliced my finger, my hand shaking with sudden realization. "Amanda, the woman from the driveway." "Oh, and Claire?" Susan's voiced with false concern. "You might want to freshen up. You look a bit worn." I bit back a retort and headed upstairs. In the bathroom, I stared at my reflection. The woman looking back at me seemed older, tired. When had I become this shadow of myself? The sound of laughter drifted up from downstairs. I recognized Jack's voice, followed by a lilting female laugh that set my teeth on edge. I descended the stairs slowly, steeling myself. Jack stood in the living room, his arm casually draped over a young woman's shoulders. She was everything I wasn't. Young, vibrant, carefree. "Claire!" Jack called out too loudly. "Come meet Amanda. She's been a godsend at the office." I shook Amanda's hand, noting how she leaned into Jack. "It's so nice to finally meet you," she gushed. "Jack talks about you all the time." "Does he now?" I said, my voice steady despite the rage building inside me. Throughout dinner, I watched Jack and Amanda, noting every shared glance, every accidental touch. Susan beamed at them, playing the perfect hostess. "So, Amanda," Susan said, refilling her wine glass, "do you plan on having children someday?" Amanda blushed. "Oh, I'd love to. I've always wanted a big family." "Unlike some people," Susan muttered, her eyes flicking to me. The room fell silent. I set down my fork, the clatter echoing in the sudden quiet. "I'm sorry, Susan," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "What exactly do you mean by that?" Susan waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, nothing, dear. It's just, well, you've been trying for so long. Maybe it's time to accept that motherhood isn't in the cards for you." I stood abruptly, my chair scraping against the floor. "Excuse me," I managed, fleeing to the kitchen. I gripped the counter, trying to steady my breathing. The kitchen door swung open, and Jack entered. "Claire, what's wrong with you?" he hissed. "You're embarrassing me." I turned to face him, years of pent-up anger and hurt bubbling to the surface. "What's wrong with me? You bring your mistress to dinner and ask what's wrong with me?" Jack's face paled. "Keep your voice down," he warned. It's not what you think." "Isn't it?" I challenged. "Tell me, Jack. Tell me I'm wrong." He opened his mouth, then closed it, unable to form the lie. In that moment, something inside me snapped. I'd spent years trying to be the perfect wife, enduring Susan's jabs, Jack's indifference, the painful fertility treatments. For what? For this farce of a family? I brushed past Jack, back into the dining room. 3 pairs of eyes turned to me expectantly. "I have an announcement," I said, my voice ringing clear. "I'm not pregnant. I'll never be pregnant. And you know what? I'm done trying." With that, I walked out of the house, leaving behind a stunned silence. As I stood in the driveway, the cool night air on my face, I felt something I hadn't in years. Hope. The game had changed, and I was finally ready to play by my own rules. I found myself at my mother's doorstep, tears streaming down my face. She opened the door, took one look at me, and pulled me into a fierce hug. "Oh, sweetheart," she whispered, stroking my hair. "What's happened?" Inside, over a steaming mug of tea, I poured out everything. Jack's affair, Susan's cruelty, the failed fertility treatments. Mom listened, her face a mix of concern and barely contained anger. "Claire," she said when I'd finished, "why are you putting yourself through this?" I stared into my tea, searching for an answer. I wanted the family I never had growing up, the perfect marriage, the white picket fence, the whole package. Mom's eyes softened. "Oh, honey, is that what this has all been about?" She reached for an old photo album, flipping to a picture of us from years ago. There we were, just the two of us at my high school graduation, beaming at the camera. "Look at us," she said. "We might not have been the traditional family, but we were happy, weren't we?" I nodded, a lump forming in my throat. "You don't need a man or a baby to complete you, Claire. You're already whole." Her words hit me like a tidal wave, washing away years of insecurity and doubt. I'd been so focused on creating the perfect family that I'd lost sight of what truly mattered, my own happiness and self-worth. "What do I do now?" I asked, feeling both liberated and terrified. Mom squeezed my hand. "You fight. Not for Jack or that sham of a marriage, but for yourself." The next morning, I returned to Susan's house with a renewed sense of purpose. I found Jack in the kitchen, nursing a cup of coffee. "Where were you?" he demanded. I was worried sick. I almost laughed at the absurdity of his concern. "I needed some time to think," I said calmly, "and I've made a decision." Jack's eyebrows shot up. "Oh? I'm moving out," I stated, my voice steady. "This isn't working, Jack. It hasn't been for a long time." He set down his mug, his face a mask of disbelief. "You can't be serious. What about our family? Our future?" "What family?" I countered. "The one where you cheat on me and your mother covers for you? The one where I'm constantly reminded of my failures?" Jack's face paled. "You know about Amanda?" "Yes, I know. I'm not as blind as you think I am." He reached for my hand, but I pulled away. "Claire, please, we can work this out. I'll end things with Amanda, I promise." For a moment, I wavered. This was everything I'd wanted to hear for so long, but then I remembered my mother's words, and my resolve strengthened. "It's too late, Jack. I deserve better than this." As I turned to leave, Susan appeared in the doorway, her face twisted with anger. "You ungrateful little," she hissed. "After everything we've done for you?" I stood my ground, meeting her gaze. "You've done nothing but tear me down, Susan. But I'm not your punching bag anymore." I brushed past her, heading upstairs to pack my things. As I threw clothes into a suitcase, I heard raised voices from below. Jack and Susan were arguing, their words muffled but their tones clear. Suddenly there was a crash, followed by silence. Alarmed, I crept down the stairs. In the living room, I found Jack on his knees, surrounded by shattered glass. Susan stood over him, her face a mask of cold fury. "You fool," she spat. "I told you to be careful, now look what you've done." Jack looked up, his eyes meeting mine. In that moment, I saw something I'd never seen before, fear. "Claire," he whispered, "there's something you need to know." I stood frozen, caught between the urge to flee and a desperate need to uncover the truth. Whatever Jack was about to reveal, I knew it would change everything. Taking a deep breath, I stepped into the room, ready to face whatever came next. I stood in the living room, my heart pounding as I waited for Jack to speak. Susan's eyes darted between us, a mix of fury and fear in her gaze. "Claire," Jack began, his voice trembling, I can't have children." The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. I felt as if the floor had disappeared beneath my feet. "What?" I whispered, struggling to comprehend. Jack couldn't meet my eyes. "I've known for years, long before we got married." The room spun around me as the implications sank in. All those fertility treatments, the disappointments, the blame I'd shouldered, it had all been for nothing. "You let me think it was my fault," I said, my voice rising. "You watched me go through treatment after treatment, knowing all along." Susan stepped forward, her face a mask of cold indifference. "It was for the best. Claire, we couldn't let people know Jack was defective." I recoiled at her words, disgust rising in my throat. So you both decided to let me suffer instead? To make me feel like a failure? Jack reached for me, but I jerked away. I'm sorry, Claire. I was afraid you'd leave me if you knew the truth. A bitter laugh escaped me. And this was better? Lying to me for years, making me think I was broken? You don't understand, Susan hissed. Our family name, our reputation. Your reputation? I cut her off, fury building inside me. Is that all you care about? Suddenly, a memory flashed through my mind. Susan's smug face as she introduced Amanda at dinner. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. That's why you brought Amanda into our lives, I said, turning to Susan. You were trying to get Jack an heir, weren't you? With or without my knowledge. The guilty look that passed between Jack and Susan confirmed my suspicions. I felt physically ill. How long? I demanded. How long have you been planning this? Jack's silence was answer enough. I turned to leave, unable to bear another moment in their presence. Claire, wait. Jack called after me. Please, we can work this out. We can adopt or... I whirled around, years of pent-up anger and hurt pouring out. Work what out, Jack? The years of lies, the manipulation, the fact that your mother was basically pimping you out to your assistant? Susan gasped, affronted. How dare you? Everything I've done has been for this family. No, I said, my voice cold. Everything you've done has been for yourself, for your precious reputation. I turned to Jack, seeing him clearly for the first time. And you? You're no better. You were willing to let me believe I was the problem rather than face the truth. Jack's face crumpled. I love you, Claire. Please don't go. For a moment, I wavered. Despite everything, a part of me still longed for the life I'd dreamed of, the family I'd never had. But then I remembered my mother's words. I was already whole. Love isn't supposed to hurt like this, I said softly. It's not supposed to make you feel small and worthless. I walked to the door, pausing with my hand on the knob. I'm leaving, I announced. Not just this house, but this marriage. I deserve better than lies and manipulation. Susan sneered. And where will you go? You have nothing without us. I met her gaze, standing tall. I have myself, and that's more than enough. As I stepped out into the cool evening air, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in years, I felt truly free. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a text from Sarah. How'd it go? Do you need backup? I smiled, realizing I wasn't as alone as I'd thought. With newfound determination, I typed my reply. It's over. Can I crash at your place tonight? We have some planning to do. As I hit send, I knew one thing for certain. This was just the beginning of my story, not the end. I'd been staying at Sarah's for a week, plotting my next move when the call came. Jack's voice crackled through the speaker, urgent and pleading. Claire, please, we need to talk. Mom's in the hospital. My first instinct was to hang up, but something in his tone gave me pause. What happened? She collapsed. The doctors, they're not sure. Please, Claire, I need you. Against my better judgment, I found myself agreeing to meet him at the hospital. As I walked through the sterile corridors, my mind raced. Was this another manipulation? A ploy to get me back? I found Jack in the waiting room, his face pale and drawn. For a moment, I saw a glimpse of the man I'd fallen in love with, vulnerable and lost. How is she? I asked, keeping my distance. Stable for now. They're running tests. He looked up at me, his eyes red-rimmed. Thank you for coming. We sat in uncomfortable silence until a doctor approached. Mr. Thompson, your mother is awake. She's asking for both of you. Surprised, I followed Jack to Susan's room. She lay in the hospital bed, looking smaller and frailer than I'd ever seen her. Her eyes locked onto mine as we entered. Claire, she said, her voice weak. I need to tell you something. Jack tensed beside me. Mom, maybe now's not the time. No, Susan interrupted. She needs to know. I can't carry this anymore. I stepped closer, curiosity overriding my caution. What is it, Susan? She took a shaky breath. Jack's affair. It wasn't his idea. It was mine. The room seemed to tilt on its axis. What? I pushed him into it, Susan continued, tears forming in her eyes. I thought if he got another woman pregnant, we could pass the child off as yours. Save the family name. I staggered back, feeling as if I'd been physically struck. You orchestrated all of this? Jack reached for me, his face a mask of shame. Claire, I'm so sorry. I should have stood up to her, should have told you the truth. But I was beyond hearing his apologies. Years of pain, humiliation, and self-doubt crashed over me like a tidal wave. Every snide comment, every accidental meeting with Amanda, every fertility treatment I'd endured, it had all been part of their sick plan. "How could you?" I whispered, my voice shaking with rage. "How could you do this to me?" Susan's face crumpled. "I was trying to protect our family, our legacy. I never meant what?" I cut her off, my voice rising. Never meant to destroy my self-esteem? Never meant to make me feel worthless and broken? Never meant for me to find out? Jack stepped between us. "Claire, please, she's sick. We can talk about this later." But I was done waiting, done being silenced. "No, we'll talk about it now. You both used me, manipulated me, lied to me for years. And for what? Your precious family name?" I turned to Susan, years of pent-up anger pouring out. "You know what, Susan? You didn't just fail to protect your family. You destroyed it. Congratulations." With that, I stormed out of the room, ignoring Jack's calls behind me. In the hallway, I leaned against the wall, struggling to breathe. The weight of their betrayal pressed down on me, threatening to crush me entirely. But beneath the pain and anger, I felt something else stirring, a fierce determination. They had taken so much from me, but I refused to let them take anything more. My phone buzzed. A text from Sarah. "Everything okay? Need an escape plan?" I smiled grimly, a plan forming in my mind. It was time to take back control, to show Jack and Susan exactly what I was capable of. I typed back, "Meet me at the house. It's time to end this. On my terms." As I left the hospital, I felt a strange calm settle over me. The final battle was coming, and this time, I was ready for war. The dining room buzzed with chatter as our friends gathered for what they thought was a simple dinner party. Little did they know, they were about to witness the implosion of my marriage. I moved through the room, a forced smile plastered on my face, my heart pounding so hard I was sure everyone could hear it. Jack hovered nearby, his eyes following me nervously. He knew something was off, but he couldn't quite put his finger on it. "Claire, darling." Susan's saccharine voice cut through the noise. She'd insisted on attending, despite her recent hospital stay. "Everything looks lovely." I turned to her, my smile never wavering. "Thank you, Susan. I'm so glad you could make it." As our guests took their seats, I caught Sarah's eye across the table. She gave me a subtle nod, reminding me of our plan. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was to come. Jack stood to make a toast, raising his glass. "To friends, family, and new beginnings," he said, his eyes meeting mine in a silent plea. I let him finish, waiting for the perfect moment. As the clinking of glasses subsided, I slowly rose to my feet. "I'd like to make a toast as well," I announced, my voice steady despite my racing pulse. Jack's face paled. "Claire, what are you doing?" I ignored him, addressing our friends instead. "I want to thank you all for being here tonight. Your friendship has meant the world to me, especially during difficult times." A hush fell over the room. I could feel all eyes on me waiting. "You see," I continued, "Jack and I have been going through some challenges lately, fertility issues among other things." Susan shifted uncomfortably in her seat. "Claire, perhaps this isn't the time." "Oh, I think it's the perfect time, Susan," I cut her off, my voice sharp. "After all, you've played such a crucial role in our marriage. Why don't you tell everyone about your brilliant plan?" Jack stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "Claire, stop this. Now." But I was beyond stopping. Years of pain and anger fueled my words. "Did you know that Jack can't have children? That all those fertility treatments I went through were for nothing?" Gasps and murmurs rippled through the room. Jack's face was ashen, his eyes pleading. "But that's not even the best part," I pressed on, my voice rising. "Tell them, Jack. Tell them about Amanda." "Who's Amanda?" someone asked. I laughed, a bitter sound. "Oh, just the woman Jack's been sleeping with. At his mother's suggestion, I might add." The room erupted into chaos. Friends looked between Jack and me, shock and disbelief on their faces. Susan attempted to interject, but I silenced her with a glare. "You see, Susan here thought it would be a great idea for Jack to get another woman pregnant, pass the baby off as mine to save the precious family name." Jack lunged forward, grabbing my arm. "Claire, that's enough." I wrenched away from him, tears stinging my eyes. "No, Jack, it's not nearly enough. For years, I've been manipulated, lied to, made to feel worthless. Well, I'm done." I turned to our stunned friends. "I'm sorry you all had to witness this, but I couldn't let their lies continue. I couldn't let them win." The room fell silent, the weight of my words hanging heavy in the air. Jack stood frozen, his face a mask of shock and shame. Susan had her head in her hands, her carefully constructed world crumbling around her. As I looked around at the faces of our friends, some sympathetic, others horrified, I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. The truth was out. There was no going back now. "I think it's time for me to go," I said quietly, gathering my things. As I walked towards the door, I heard Jack's broken voice behind me. "Claire, please, don't leave." I paused, turning to face him one last time. "I'm not leaving, Jack, I'm escaping." With that, I stepped out into the cool night air, leaving behind the shattered remains of my old life. As I walked away from the house, I felt lighter than I had in years. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, I was ready to face it, on my own terms. The morning sun streamed through the windows of my new apartment as I sipped my coffee, savoring the quiet. It had been 3 months since the dinner party, 3 months of rebuilding my life piece by piece. The divorce papers sat on the coffee table, signed and ready to be filed. A knock at the door startled me from my reverie. I opened it to find Jack standing there, looking haggard and desperate. "Claire," he said, his voice hoarse. "Please, can we talk?" I hesitated, then stepped aside to let him in. We sat across from each other, the weight of our shared history hanging between us. "I've left Susan's house," Jack began. "I've ended things with Amanda. I want to make this right." I studied him, searching for any trace of the man I'd once loved. "It's too late for that, Jack. You know that, don't you?" He nodded, his eyes filling with tears. "I know. I don't know how to live without you." For a moment, I felt a flicker of the old longing, the desire to comfort him. But then I remembered all the lies, all the pain. "You'll learn," I said firmly. "Just like I did." Jack's gaze fell on the divorce papers. "So this is really it, then?" I nodded, feeling a strange mix of sadness and relief. "It is. I hope you find happiness, Jack, but it won't be with me." As he left, I felt a chapter of my life closing. But instead of grief, I felt a surge of excitement for what lay ahead. Later that day, I met Sarah for lunch. She grinned as I approached, raising her glass in a toast. "To new beginnings," she said. I clinked my glass against hers, smiling. "And to true friends." As we ate, Sarah leaned in conspiratorially. "So, have you thought about what's next? The world's your oyster now, Claire." I paused, considering. "You know, I think I might go back to school, finish that degree I put on hold when I got married." Sarah beamed. "That's my girl. Show them what you're made of." As we finished our meal, my phone buzzed. A text from my mother. "Proud of you, sweetheart. Dinner tonight?" Warmth spread through my chest. Throughout this ordeal, my mother had been my rock, reminding me of the strength I'd inherited from her. That evening, as we sat in her cozy kitchen, Mom reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "How are you really doing, Claire?" she asked, her eyes searching mine. I took a deep breath, considering the question. "I'm okay," I said slowly. "Better than okay, actually. For the first time in years, I feel like myself again." Mom nodded, understanding in her eyes. "You know, when your father left, I thought my world had ended, but it was just beginning. Sometimes we have to lose everything to find ourselves." Her words resonated deep within me. I thought of all the years I'd spent trying to fit into the mold of the perfect wife, the perfect daughter-in-law, how I'd lost myself in the process. "I think I'm ready to start living for myself," I said, surprised by the conviction in my voice. Mom smiled, pride shining in her eyes. "That's my brave girl." As I drove home that night, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in years, I was excited about the journey. Back in my apartment, I stood by the window, looking out at the city lights. I thought of Jack, of Susan, of the life I'd left behind. There was sadness there, yes, but also a profound sense of freedom. I picked up a framed photo from my bedside table. Me at my college graduation, young and full of dreams. I traced my younger self's smile, remembering the hope and ambition I'd once had. "Time to dream again," I whispered to myself. As I got ready for bed, I caught my reflection in the mirror. The woman looking back at me was older, wiser, with a few more lines around her eyes. But there was a spark there that I hadn't seen in years, a spark of possibility, of life yet to be lived. I smiled at my reflection, feeling a surge of excitement for the future. The journey wouldn't be easy, but I was ready for it, ready to rediscover the woman I'd always been meant to be. As I drifted off to sleep, one thought echoed in my mind. This isn't the end of my story. It's just the beginning. I stared at the computer screen, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. The house was quiet, save for the gentle hum of the dishwasher in the kitchen. I should have been working on my freelance project, but instead I found myself scrolling through yet another article by Patricia Brooke, the renowned marriage therapist. Communication is key, her words practically leaped off the screen. When your partner's behavior changes, it's crucial to address it head-on. I snorted, closing the tab. If only it were that simple. The front door creaked open, and I quickly minimized my browser. David's footsteps echoed through the hallway, heavier than usual. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for whatever version of my husband would walk through that door. Naomi? His voice was flat, devoid of the warmth I'd grown accustomed to over our 12 years of marriage. In here, I called out, forcing a smile as he appeared in the doorway of our home office. David's tie hung loosely around his neck, his shirt wrinkled and untucked. Dark circles rimmed his eyes, a testament to the late nights he'd been keeping lately. He barely met my gaze as he leaned against the doorframe. "How was your day?" I asked, desperately trying to maintain some semblance of normalcy. He shrugged, his eyes darting around the room. "Fine. Busy, you know how it is." I didn't know, actually. That was the problem. David had become a stranger to me over the past few months, and I was at a loss for how to bridge the growing chasm between us. "I was thinking we could go out for dinner tonight," I suggested, hoping to spark some interest. "That new Italian place downtown just opened up." David's jaw tightened. "I'm not really in the mood, Naomi. Maybe another time." I felt my smile falter. "Oh, okay. Well, I could whip up something quick here if you're hungry." "I already ate," he mumbled, turning to leave. "I'm going to take a shower." As he disappeared down the hallway, I slumped back in my chair, the weight of our failing marriage pressing down on me. What had happened to us? Where was the man who used to surprise me with flowers and impromptu dance parties in our living room? I reopened my browser, Patricia Brooke's smiling face greeting me once again. Her perfectly coiffed, silver hair and designer glasses exuded an air of wisdom and success. I found myself resenting her, even as I devoured every word she wrote. "When trust erodes, it's like a cancer in the relationship," one passage read. "Look for the root cause, not just the symptoms." The root cause. I'd been searching for months, analyzing every interaction, every potential misstep. Was it the stress of David's job? Had I become too focused on my own career? Or was there something more sinister at play? My phone buzzed, startling me out of my spiraling thoughts. It was a text from my Aunt Laura. "How are things, sweetheart? Still coming for lunch tomorrow?" I smiled, grateful for the distraction. Aunt Laura had always been my rock, especially since my parents passed away. If anyone could help me make sense of this mess, it was her. As I typed out a reply, my eyes drifted back to Patricia Brooke's website. Something caught my attention, a small detail I'd overlooked before. In her bio, it mentioned she'd grown up in the same small town where David was born. Curiosity piqued, I began to dig deeper. It was probably nothing, just a coincidence. But as I scrolled through old newspaper archives and pieced together fragments of information, a pit formed in my stomach. The dates aligned perfectly. The names matched. And there, buried in a decades-old high school yearbook, was a photo that made my blood run cold. A young Patricia Brooke, her arm draped around a boy who looked eerily like my husband. My hands shook as I zoomed in on the caption, "Patricia and her cousin, James." But I knew that face. It wasn't David's cousin. It was his father. I paced our small living room, my mind reeling from the discovery I'd made. The weight of this secret pressed down on me, making it hard to breathe. How could I tell David that the woman he'd grown up believing was just a distant relative was actually his mother? The sound of the shower stopped, and I froze. David's footsteps padded down the hallway, and I scrambled to compose myself. "Hey," he said, emerging in sweatpants and an old t-shirt. "I'm heading to bed early. Got a big meeting tomorrow." I nodded, my throat tight. "David, wait. Can we talk for a minute?" He hesitated, his hand on the bedroom doorknob. "Can it wait? I'm pretty beat." "It's important," I insisted, gesturing to the couch. With a sigh, he sat down and I perched on the edge of the coffee table across from him. I took a deep breath, steeling myself. "I know things have been difficult lately, I began. With you losing your job and... I told you I'm working on it, David cut in, his voice sharp. I've got some leads. I held up my hands. I know, that's not what this is about. I found something out today, and I'm not sure how to tell you. David's brow furrowed. What are you talking about, Naomi? Just as I opened my mouth to speak, his phone buzzed. He glanced at it, his eyes widening. I have to take this, he said, standing abruptly. David, please. But he was already walking away, speaking in hushed tones into the phone. I caught snippets of the conversation. Yes, I understand. No, she doesn't know. I'll figure it out. My heart raced. What was he hiding? When he returned, his face was pale. That was the bank. We're in trouble, Naomi. I've been trying to handle it, but... What do you mean? In trouble? I asked, dread pooling in my stomach. David ran a hand through his hair. I've been borrowing money, a lot of money, to keep us afloat after I lost my job, and now they want it back. The room spun. How much? More than we have, he whispered. We might lose the house. I sat there, stunned. The secret I'd uncovered about Patricia suddenly seemed insignificant in the face of this new crisis. How could we have fallen so far, so fast? Why didn't you tell me? I asked, my voice barely audible. David's shoulders slumped. I thought I could fix it. I didn't want you to worry. A bitter laugh escaped me. Well, that worked out great, didn't it? We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of our financial ruin settling over us like a heavy blanket. Then a thought occurred to me. What about your aunt? I suggested, my mind racing. Patricia Brooke, she's loaded, isn't she? Maybe she could help. David's head snapped up. What? No, we can't ask her for money. We barely know her. If only he knew the truth. I bit my lip, wrestling with whether to reveal what I'd discovered. But looking at David's defeated expression, I couldn't bring myself to add to his burden. I just thought, she's family, right? I pressed, and she's always talking about the importance of supporting loved ones in her books. David shook his head. It's not that simple, Naomi. There's history there, things I don't like to talk about. My heart raced. Did he know more than he was letting on? What kind of history? I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. He stood up abruptly. It doesn't matter. We'll figure this out on our own. We always do. As he retreated to the bedroom, I sat there, my mind whirling. The contrast between our struggling existence and Patricia's opulent lifestyle seemed more stark than ever. She owed David, owed us, didn't she? I pulled out my phone, my fingers hovering over Patricia Brooke's contact information. It would be so easy to call her, to demand she take responsibility for the son she'd abandoned. But as I stared at the number, a new plan began to form in my mind. If Patricia wouldn't help willingly, maybe it was time to force her hand. After all, how much was her precious reputation worth? I smiled grimly, a sense of purpose filling me for the first time in months. One way or another, Patricia Brooke was going to pay for what she'd done. The bell above Aunt Laura's door chimed as I stepped into her cozy cafe. The smell of fresh-baked muffins and coffee enveloped me, a comforting contrast to the turmoil in my mind. Naomi, sweetheart? Aunt Laura called from behind the counter. I've got a fresh pot brewing. Come on back. I followed her into the small office, sinking into the worn leather chair across from her desk. Laura studied my face, her brow furrowing with concern. All right, spill it, she said, sliding a steaming mug towards me. What's got you looking like you've seen a ghost? I took a deep breath and launched into the story. The discovery about Patricia, David's strange behavior, and our looming financial crisis. Laura listened intently, her eyes widening as I revealed each new piece of information. My God, she whispered when I finished. That woman has some nerve, prancing around giving marriage advice when she abandoned her own child. I nodded, gripping my mug tightly. I don't know what to do, Aunt Laura. David's falling apart, and I'm terrified we're going to lose everything. And all the while, Patricia's living it up in her mansion, probably laughing at us. Laura's eyes narrowed. Oh, I don't think so. Not on my watch. She leaned forward, a determined glint in her eye. We're going to pay Miss High and Mighty a little visit. What? No, we can't just... We absolutely can, Laura interrupted. That woman owes David, and you, big time. It's high time she faced the music. Before I could protest further, Laura was grabbing her purse and ushering me out the door. We climbed into her beat-up Volvo, and I gave her Patricia's address with a mix of trepidation and excitement. As we drove through increasingly affluent neighborhoods, my anger grew. How dare Patricia live like this while her son struggled? The contrast between her world and ours was stark, a physical representation of the injustice of it all. We pulled up to a sprawling estate, complete with manicured lawns and a fountain in the circular driveway. Laura let out a low whistle. Well, well, looks like abandoning your child pays pretty well these days. We marched up to the ornate front door, and I hesitated for just a moment before ringing the bell. The sound echoed through the house, and I held my breath. The door swung open, revealing Patricia Brooke herself. She was even more polished in person, perfectly coiffed silver hair, designer outfit, not a wrinkle in sight. Her eyes widened in surprise. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice cool and professional. I straightened my spine. "Hello, Patricia. I'm Naomi, David's wife." The color drained from her face. I'm not sure I understand. How did you... Oh, I think you understand perfectly, Laura cut in, pushing past Patricia into the foyer. "We're here to talk about the son you abandoned." Patricia's composure cracked. She glanced around nervously before ushering us into a lavish sitting room. "Please, keep your voices down," she hissed. "My housekeeper." "Your housekeeper is the least of your worries right now," I snapped. "Do you have any idea what David's going through? What we're going through?" Patricia sank into an armchair, her carefully constructed facade crumbling. "I never meant. I was so young when I had him. I thought I was doing the right thing, giving him up for adoption." "And what about now?" Laura demanded. "You're sitting pretty while your son is about to lose everything." Patricia's head snapped up. "What do you mean, lose everything?" I hesitated, realizing I'd revealed more than I intended. But as I looked around at the opulent room, at the life Patricia had built on the back of her abandoned child, my resolve hardened. "David lost his job," I said, my voice steady. "We're in serious financial trouble. We might lose our home." Patricia's eyes filled with tears. "I had no idea. I want to help. Please, let me make this right." For a moment, hope flared in my chest. But then I remembered the years of silence, the secrets, the pain etched on David's face. "It's not that simple," I said, standing up. "You can't just throw money at this and make it go away. David deserves to know the truth." Patricia's face hardened. "No, absolutely not. It would destroy him and my career. I'll help financially, but David can never know about this." As I stared at her, my anger boiling over, I realized this was far from over. Patricia might think she held all the cards, but I was just getting started. "We'll see about that," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "This isn't over, Patricia, not by a long shot." I stormed out of Patricia's mansion, Aunt Laura hot on my heels. The cool evening air did little to quell the fire raging inside me. How dare she try to buy our silence? As if money could erase years of abandonment and lies. "Naomi, wait," Laura called, catching up to me at her car. "We need to think this through." I whirled around, my hands shaking. "Think what through? That woman abandoned David, and now she wants to throw cash at us like we're some charity case? It's insulting." Laura gripped my shoulders, her eyes serious. "I know, sweetheart, but we need to be smart about this. David's still in the dark, and your financial situation..." The mention of our money troubles doused my anger with a wave of cold reality. I slumped against the car, suddenly exhausted. "What am I supposed to do, Aunt Laura?" I whispered. "We're drowning in debt, and the one person who could help us is the last person I want anything from." Laura's expression softened. "Let's get you home. We'll figure this out together." The drive back was silent, my mind racing with possibilities and consequences. By the time we pulled up to my house, I'd made a decision. "I have to tell David," I said, my voice stronger than I felt. "He deserves to know the truth." Laura nodded, squeezing my hand. "You're right, but be careful, Naomi. This could change everything." I found David in our home office, hunched over a stack of bills. The sight of him, looking so defeated, made my heart ache. "Hey," I said softly, hovering in the doorway. "Can we talk?" He looked up, his eyes red-rimmed and tired. "If it's about money, I'm working on it. I promise." I shook my head, moving to perch on the edge of his desk. "It's not about that. Well, not entirely. David, there's something I need to tell you about Patricia Brooke." His brow furrowed. "What about her?" Taking a deep breath, I launched into the story, the research, the discovery, the confrontation. With each word, David's face grew paler, his knuckles white as he gripped the armrests of his chair. When I finished, the silence was deafening. David stared at me, his expression unreadable. "Say something," I pleaded. "Anything." He stood abruptly, pacing the small room. This can't be true. Patricia? My mother? It doesn't make sense." "I know it's a shock, but—" "A shock?" David laughed bitterly. "That's putting it mildly, and you went to see her, without telling me?" I flinched at the accusation in his voice. "I was trying to protect you, to get answers." "Answers?" He spun to face me, his eyes blazing. "You had no right, Naomi. This is my life, my family. I'm your family." I shot back, hurt and anger bubbling up. "I was just trying to help us." David's phone buzzed, interrupting our argument. He glanced at it, his face draining of color. "It's the bank," he muttered. They're foreclosing on the house. We have 30 days. The room spun. I gripped the desk for support, my mind reeling. "What are we going to do?" David slumped back into his chair, defeated. "I don't know. We don't have any options left." As I watched my husband crumble before me, a cold determination settled in my chest. There was one option left. One I'd sworn I wouldn't take. "Actually," I said, my voice steady, "we do have an option. Patricia offered to help us financially." David's head snapped up. "What? No, absolutely not. We are not taking money from that woman." "David, be reasonable. We're about to lose everything. Our home, our future. Can we really afford to let pride stand in the way?" He stared at me, conflict raging in his eyes. "And what's the catch? There's always a catch." I hesitated, knowing my next words could change everything. She doesn't want you to know the truth about her being your mother." The silence that followed was deafening. David's face cycled through a range of emotions: anger, hurt, confusion. Finally he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "So that's it? We take her money and pretend none of this ever happened?" I met his gaze, steeling myself for what came next. "No, we take her money and then we make her face the consequences of her actions, once and for all." As the words left my mouth, I knew there was no going back. The war with Patricia had officially begun, and I was prepared to do whatever it took to win. The weeks following our confrontation with Patricia were a whirlwind of conflicting emotions and subtle changes. David and I had reluctantly accepted her financial help, but the cost to our peace of mind was steep. Every time the phone rang or an unexpected envelope arrived in the mail, I felt my stomach clench with anxiety. One afternoon, as I sorted through the bills, I noticed something odd. Several of our outstanding debts had been mysteriously paid off. At first, I thought it was a mistake, but as I dug deeper, I realized the truth. Patricia was meddling in our lives, far beyond the agreed-upon assistance. "David," I called out, my voice tight with anger, "you need to see this." He appeared in the doorway, his expression wary. "What is it now, Naomi?" I thrust the papers at him. "Your mother's been paying off our debts behind our backs. She's trying to buy her way into our lives." David's face darkened as he scanned the documents. I can't believe she'd go this far." "Can't you?" I shot back. "She's been manipulating situations her entire life. Why stop now?" Before David could respond, his phone buzzed. He glanced at it, his eyebrows shooting up in surprise. "It's my boss. He wants me to come in for a meeting tomorrow. Faust says there might be an opportunity for me to get my old job back." My heart sank. "Let me guess. Patricia had something to do with this too?" David's silence was all the confirmation I needed. I watched as he struggled with the conflicting emotions playing across his face, gratitude warring with resentment, hope battling pride. "We can't keep living like this," I said softly. "She's pushing us into the role of helpless victims in our own lives. Don't you see? She gets to play the savior while keeping her precious secret intact." David slumped onto the couch, running a hand through his hair. "What choice do we have, Naomi? We were drowning. At least now we have a chance." I sat beside him, taking his hand in mine. "But at what cost? Our self-respect? Our independence? There has to be another way." As we sat there, the weight of our situation pressing down on us, an idea began to form in my mind. It was risky, potentially disastrous, but it might be our only chance to regain control. "What if," I said slowly, "we turn the tables on Patricia, use her own tactics against her?" David looked at me, confusion etched on his face. "What do you mean?" I stood up, pacing as the plan took shape. "She's so desperate to keep her secret, right? To maintain her perfect image. What if we create a situation where she has no choice but to reveal the truth herself?" "Naomi, that's crazy. We can't..." Just hear me out, I interrupted. Karsnap, we engineer a crisis, a big one, something that would force Patricia to choose between her secret and watching you suffer. She'd have to come clean or risk losing you forever. David's eyes widened as he grasped the implications. You're talking about manipulating my own mother, about lying and scheming. How does that make us any better than her? His words stung, but I pressed on. Sometimes you have to fight fire with fire. Don't you want the truth to come out on our terms? Don't you want justice for all those years she abandoned you? I could see the conflict raging behind David's eyes. Part of him was horrified by the idea, but another part, the part that had been hurt and betrayed, was intrigued. I don't know, Naomi, he said finally. This is a dangerous game you're proposing. I knelt in front of him, taking his hands in mine. I know it is, but think about it. Really think. Do we want to spend the rest of our lives beholden to Patricia? Always wondering when the other shoe will drop? Or do we take control of our own destiny? David was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on our intertwined hands. When he looked up, there was a new resolve in his eyes. Okay, he said softly. Tell me more about this plan of yours. As I began to outline my strategy, a mix of excitement and trepidation coursed through me. We were about to embark on a dangerous path, one that could either save us or destroy everything we held dear. But as I looked at David, seeing the spark of determination in his eyes, I knew we had no choice. It was time to beat Patricia at her own game. My hands shook as I dialed Patricia's number, adrenaline coursing through my veins. This was it, the moment our entire plan hinged on. One false move, and everything would crumble. Patricia Brooks speaking, her crisp voice answered. I took a deep breath, channeling every ounce of desperation I could muster. Patricia, it's Naomi. We need your help. It's David. There was a pause on the other end. What's happened? Is he all right? No, I choked out, tears coming easily as I thought about the very real possibility of losing everything. He's in the hospital. There was an accident at work, and we can't afford the treatment he needs. Patricia's sharp intake of breath was audible. What do you mean? I thought I'd taken care of your financial troubles. I launched into the story we'd carefully crafted, a tale of mounting medical bills, experimental treatments, and a ticking clock. With each word, I could hear Patricia's resolve crumbling. I'll wire you the money immediately, she said, her voice tight with concern. It's not just about the money anymore, I pressed, my heart racing. David's asking questions about his past, about his family medical history. The doctors need information, and I don't know what to tell him. The silence that followed was deafening. I held my breath, praying our gambit would work. I'll be there in an hour, Patricia said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. As I hung up, I caught David's eye across the room. He nodded grimly, and we set our plan in motion. An hour later, we sat in a private hospital room we'd managed to secure for our ruse. David lay in the bed, looking pale and drawn, the result of hours of careful makeup and preparation. When Patricia burst through the door, her usual composure was nowhere to be seen. Her eyes were wild, her silver hair disheveled. David, she breathed, rushing to his bedside. My God, I had no idea it was this bad. David's eyes flickered open, confusion etched on his face. Aunt Patricia, what are you doing here? Patricia hesitated, glancing at me. I steeled myself, knowing this was the moment of truth. David, I said softly, there's something you need to know. About Patricia, about your past. Naomi, don't, Patricia warned, her voice low and dangerous. But I pressed on, recounting the story of our discovery, watching as David's face cycled through shock, anger, and disbelief. Is this true? He demanded, turning to Patricia. Are you my mother? The room fell silent, the weight of decades of secrets hanging in the air. Patricia's shoulders slumped, defeat written across her face. Yes, she whispered. It's true. I'm so sorry, David. I never meant for you to find out like this. What happened next was a blur of raised voices and accusations. David miraculously recovered from his illness, confronted Patricia about years of abandonment and lies. Patricia, torn between defending herself and begging for forgiveness, crumbled under the weight of her own deceptions. As I watched them, a sick feeling grew in the pit of my stomach. This was what I wanted, wasn't it? Patricia exposed, David finally knowing the truth. So why did it feel so hollow? You, Patricia spat, turning on me with fury in her eyes. You orchestrated all of this. The accident, the medical emergency, it was all a lie, wasn't it? I lifted my chin, meeting her gaze. Sometimes you have to fight fire with fire. But as I said the words, I saw the hurt and betrayal in David's eyes. Not just directed at Patricia, but at me as well. Both of you, he said, his voice low and dangerous. You've both been lying to me, manipulating me. I don't know who to trust anymore. As David stormed out of the room, leaving Patricia and me in stunned silence, I realized the true cost of our revenge. In our quest for justice, we'd shattered the very foundations of trust our family was built on. And as I stood there, caught between a shattered Patricia and the echoing absence of my husband, I wondered if this victory was worth the price we'd paid. The hospital corridor stretched before me, endless and cold. I ran, my footsteps echoing off the sterile walls, desperately searching for David. My elaborate plan, my thirst for justice, it all seemed so foolish now. "David," I called out, ignoring the disapproving glances from nurses and patients. "David, please!" I rounded a corner and froze. There he was, slumped in a chair in the hospital's small chapel, his head in his hands. The sight of him, so broken and vulnerable, made my heart ache. "David," I whispered, approaching slowly. "I'm so sorry. I never meant for it to go this far." He looked up, his eyes red-rimmed and filled with a pain I'd never seen before. "Didn't you, Naomi? Wasn't this exactly what you wanted?" His words stung, but I couldn't deny the truth in them. I sank into the chair beside him, the weight of my actions pressing down on me. "I thought I was doing the right thing," I said softly. "I thought you deserved to know the truth about Patricia." David laughed bitterly. "The truth? What truth? That my mother abandoned me? That my wife has been lying to me for months? That my entire life is built on secrets and manipulation?" Each word was like a knife to my heart. I reached for his hand, but he pulled away. "David, please, let me explain." "Explain what?" he snapped, standing abruptly. "How you and Patricia have been playing me like a puppet, how you both claim to love me, but you've done nothing but lie and scheme." I stood too, desperation clawing at my throat. "That's not fair. Patricia was the one who abandoned you, who kept this secret for decades. I was just trying to protect you." "Protect me?" David's voice rose, echoing off the chapel walls. "By creating an elaborate hoax? By making me think I was dying? Do you have any idea what that felt like?" Tears streamed down my face as the full impact of my actions hit me. "I'm sorry," I choked out. "I'm so sorry. I couldn't stand seeing Patricia waltz into our lives, acting like she had any right to be there. After everything we've been through, after all the struggles we've faced." David's expression softened slightly, but the hurt in his eyes remained. "I understand why you did it, Naomi, but that doesn't make it right. You should have trusted me with the truth from the beginning." Before I could respond, the chapel door burst open. Patricia stood there, her usual poise shattered, mascara streaking down her face. "David, please," she begged. "Let me explain. There's so much you don't know." David's face hardened again. "I think I know enough. You gave me up, and then you tried to buy your way back into my life with your money and influence. What more is there to say?" Patricia stepped forward, her hands outstretched. "I was young and scared. I thought I was doing what was best for you. Please, just give me a chance to make things right." I watched as David looked between us, the two women who claimed to love him most in the world. The air crackled with tension, years of secrets and lies finally laid bare. "I can't do this," David said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "I can't trust either of you right now. I need time to think." As he pushed past us and out of the chapel, I felt my world crumbling around me. I'd won, hadn't I? Patricia's secret was out, the truth finally revealed. But at what cost? I turned to face Patricia, expecting to see anger or accusation in her eyes. Instead, I saw a reflection of my own pain and regret. "What have we done?" she whispered. In that moment, standing in the silent chapel with my husband's long-lost mother, I realized the true magnitude of our actions. We'd both claimed to be acting out of love, but our selfish desires and need for control had torn apart the very person we were trying to protect. As the weight of our choices settled over us, I knew that the real battle was just beginning. Somehow, we had to find a way to rebuild the trust we'd shattered, if David would ever let us back into his life again. The days following the hospital confrontation blurred together in a haze of sleepless nights and unanswered calls. David had disappeared, leaving Patricia and me to stew in the mess we'd created. It wasn't until a week later that I received a text. "Meet me at the park, 2 p.m., both of you." My heart raced as I approached the bench where David sat, his face unreadable. Patricia arrived moments later, her usual polished appearance replaced by dark circles and disheveled hair. We stood there, 3 broken pieces of a family that never was, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. "I've had time to think," David began, his voice steady but strained, "about what you both did and why." I opened my mouth to speak, but he held up a hand, silencing me. "Let me finish," he said. "Patricia, you abandoned me. You chose your career and your reputation over your own child. And Naomi, you lied to me. You manipulated me in the cruelest way possible, all in the name of what you thought was right." Patricia's shoulders slumped, tears streaming down her face. I felt my own eyes burning, the weight of my actions pressing down on me. "But," David continued, "I also understand that you both acted out of love, however misguided it was." He turned to Patricia. "You were young and scared. You thought you were giving me a better life, and in many ways, you did. My adoptive parents loved me, and I had a good childhood." Patricia nodded, unable to speak through her tears. David then faced me, his eyes softening slightly. "And Naomi, you were trying to protect me, to right a wrong you saw in the world. Your methods were terrible, but your intentions, I believe they were pure." I felt a glimmer of hope, but David wasn't finished. "The thing is," he said, his voice breaking slightly, "I don't know if I can ever fully trust either of you again. You've both shown that you're willing to lie and manipulate to get what you want, even if you believe it's for my benefit." The silence that followed was deafening. I watched as David struggled with his next words, the pain evident on his face. "But," he said finally, "I'm willing to try, to rebuild, if you both are." Patricia stepped forward, her hand outstretched. "David, I know I can never make up for the years I lost with you. But if you'll let me, I want to be a part of your life now. No more secrets, no more lies." David hesitated for a moment before taking her hand. "It won't be easy," he warned. "We have a lot of lost time to make up for." Then he turned to me, and I felt my heart stop. "Naomi," he said softly, "can you promise me no more schemes, no more hidden agendas, just us?" I nodded, tears flowing freely now. "I promise, David. I'm so sorry for everything. I love you, and I want to make this right." He pulled me into a tight embrace, and for a moment I felt like I could breathe again. As we stood there in the park, the 3 of us linked by blood and choice, I realized that this wasn't an ending, but a beginning. We had a long road ahead of us, filled with therapy sessions, difficult conversations, and the slow rebuilding of trust. But as I looked at David, his face etched with both pain and hope, I knew it was a journey worth taking. The lines between revenge and justice, between right and wrong, had blurred beyond recognition. In the end, all we had left was the truth, messy, complicated, and painfully real. "So," David said, a hint of his old smile tugging at his lips, "where do we go from here?" I squeezed his hand, feeling Patricia's tentative touch on my shoulder. "Forward," I said, "together." As we walked out of the park, the afternoon sun warming our faces, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. The road ahead would be difficult, but for the first time in months, I felt a glimmer of hope. We had weathered the storm of secrets and lies, and though we were battered and bruised, we had emerged on the other side, not unscathed but unbroken. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear. Our family, in all its messy, complicated glory, would face it together.